Hip-hop is unique. It's one of the few genres, in my opinion, which you can say exactly what is on your mind without sacrificing much of the intended musical arrangement.
Cause every word I said'll be deadly, a MC murderer, signs are steadily given.
And if what's on your mind is a problem with another individual, well, you got beef with that individual.
I can't stand this nigga. You understand what I'm saying? Like, this ain't WWF.
And when you have beef in this genre, you can take a production from a producer like The Alchemist, who samples a gospel record, but then you can use it to make one of the darkest diss songs we've ever heard.
What gospel artist you made that dark shit for?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Oh, you just sampled the gospel.
Now, Kendrick Lamar did just that on Meet the Grams, and we'll talk about the severity of Meet the Grams in a second, but as well as many other diss records and the Kendrick versus Drake battle. But before we do that, we first have to clarify what's beef. That was a question posed by Biggie on his 1997 song with the same title, which he proceeded to answer. Biggie said, beef is when you need two gats to go to sleep. Beef is when your moms ain't safe up in the streets. Beef is when I see you, guaranteed to end up in the ICU. One more time. Now, I contend people don't truly know what beef is. Like, we use it interchangeably with competition, friendly battles, minor industry problems. And while I understand also because beef can often arise from these issues, however, if I had it my way, it would be reserved for real friction.
Real respect me fake, cause want beef, cause they know that's the only way we ever gonna speak.
Or friction that could lead to violence or that has led to violence.
Smell me? You dig? But they kicking that beef shit. Smell me? Beef is never corporate.
And I know I can't have everything my way, but just walk with me here. Now, it's clear Biggie recognized what real beef was.
The Tupac article had me pissed off, you know what I'm saying? And the rumors that's spreading.
And I speculate he was sending a message to the world and Tupac, who I think would agree.
It was never a beef. It's only a difference in opinion. That's like me being mad at my little brother.
Well, maybe not.
You claim to be a player, but I fucked you up. We bust on bad boy, niggas fuck for life.
He was a complex soul. But unfortunately, whether related or not, both men met their demise during the midst of these issues. Now, the untimely demise of both Biggie and Pac left a stain on hip-hop that many are quick to point to during the onset of any conflict. Now, I got some questions, right? Like, how should the genre balance all of this? The possibility of real beefs that can lead to unfortunate events, the aspect of competition on charts, and or the battle for critical acclaim, or battles for who's got the best verse on the same songs, simple things like that. Now, these are all questions that I want to answer by looking to the recent battle between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, as well as the involvement of J. Cole, the middle child who shouldn't be forgotten. Actually, you know what? I wonder what J. Cole thinks beef is. Now, not only do I want to analyze the latest Rap Shinobi Wars, as I like to call it, the great Rap Shinobi Wars, I also want to take us back to impactful moments in hip-hop history when people competed, battled, and had real beef. Now, let's deep dive into this. For starters, see, if you want to know what beef is, we first have to understand words mean things. I mean, we use a lot of words loosely. I make this mistake as well. I use the word beef, battle, and competition interchangeably, right? But there are differences that I want to start pointing out and start using them appropriately. Like, I know saying Joyner Lucas is battling Skepta doesn't sound as sexy as Joyner and Skepta got beef. But we need some order around here. Joyner and Skepta, that was not beef. It was something, but it wasn't beef. Like, if I ask you what the Kendrick versus Drake conflict was, what would you call it? A battle? A competition? Beef? Now, if I did a poll, most likely I would see almost equal votes for all three. Now, some of you may say, well, it was a competition that turned into a battle, that turned into a beef. Now, in my opinion, my youth, you're closer to the truth. See, but I know what you're thinking also. Well, HQ, didn't you just say beef has to involve some sort of violence? Well, I didn't necessarily say that. Just, again, walk with me, let me land the plane. It's not necessarily that it has to lead to violence, but it has to lead to some kind of consequences. It has to lead to something. There has to be some kind of escalation, and I need a little patience from you. So let's kind of go through this entire thing. All right. Now, let's talk about rap history and about times we saw examples of competition, impressive displays of battling, and unfortunately, real beef. See, rap is competitive. Some people actually say rap is like a sport, but to me, life is competitive. A wise man once told me every day is a fight for your sanity, your riches, your family, and their well-being. And this sentiment extends to rap. It really, really does. Rap is an embodiment of that, right? Now, I know that it's often a job for some people, but for others, it's a way of life and expression. A genre of expression which prompts conversations and comparisons between styles, ability, and impact is sure to put artists in some sort of go mode. Now, you take this go mode, you combine it with the fact that the genre is even more commercialized now, so there's more at stake. Now we're promoting even more competition, right? Now, I want to go immediately into analyzing the aspect of competition between Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick Lamar, and how it may have affected their relationships, along with other example of pure competition in hip hop, right? See, in the early 2010s, there was an opening for new MCs to carry the proverbial torch, right? We saw the likes of Kanye, Lil Wayne, and Jay-Z and Nas either sort of like hitting their peak of their prime or entering what was clearly a later stage of their career. We saw that rap was now, although letting older guys flourish, it now allowed for an opening for new MCs to stand out. You get what I'm saying? And now, there were many MCs around this time that made an impact and had pretty good careers, right? But three gentlemen clearly stood out, otherwise known as the Big Three. Now, I know some of you are going to ask me about the origination of the Big Three and that word. I've had some of you curse me out on other apps before because I didn't get it right. Some people pointed to anime. Some people said, well, okay. How about we settle for this, okay? You guys put all your theories in the comments and let me know why and when you think that Big Three name was formed. But anyway, in my opinion, I think this is the first time that we had ever seen sort of more than two people sharing the crown and in ways complemented each other. I felt like rap used to rotate the crown yearly or like on a turn-by-turn basis, right? Biggie would dominate one year while Jay would dominate another, Nas, DMX, so on and so forth. But the way I believe this Big Three coexisted was mostly due to each men owning a space or being the leader in a particular attribute, right? Like for a long time on the hit records and the numbers guy, that was Drake. That was Drake's thing. That is low-key still Drake's thing. And Kendrick was the guy with the acclaim from the critics, the discography strong, the album rankings to go with all of that. And that's kind of still his thing. And J. Cole, all right. J. Cole, well, but some people don't understand his superpower. By the way, I have done a short video on this before about J. Cole's superpower, but he's mastered relatability and connecting with his fans from a human level, doing things like the Dollar and Dream Show, riding his bike in New York City, meeting random New Yorkers, all this backed by the words in his music that felt like a gentleman that just knew the daily struggle of every regular old man and woman or college student listening to his raps. Now, although everybody had their superpower, they often overlapped. And what I mean by that is at any minute, Kendrick could make a #1 project, sell 600,000 first week. Did that with Damn. Now you got Cole, he could sell records. Could get nominated for a Grammy. Now I'll bet it's a feature, right? But he could do that. And then you got Drake, who could also tap into making you relate to him, as well as doing songs like God's Plans and a touching video to go along with it. I mean, I remember, dog, I was out here in these streets. A lot of y'all was singing Marvin's Room, and you felt that. You felt that, buddy. Now, here's my thing, though. So with this overlap, it's easy to see how competition could arise between these three individuals. Now, it is convenient that we have three MCs to discuss this. And I'm going to psychoanalyze each MC along with the aspects of how they deal with competition, battles, and beef. Now, we're also going to go back to recent moments in hip hop history of either good or terrible examples of these things unfolding. For competition, we'll mostly focus on analyzing Kendrick Lamar as the lead dog in that category. Now, we'll talk about how that, applies to Drake and J. Cole, but you get my point. For battle, we'll focus on using J. Cole as the lead dog in that category. And for beef, we'll go with Drake. Now, I kind of want to give you guys a disclaimer. I guess I should. Yeah, listen, man. Say, for example, if you're a Kendrick Lamar fan, and I should say stan, and you just can't deal with someone psychoanalyzing your favorite rapper, when I'm on the competition portion, which is coming up, you might as well just skip it. If you're a J. Cole stan and you can't deal with somebody critiquing J. Cole, psychoanalyzing, you might as well skip the battle portion. If you're a Drake fan, stan, and you can't deal with somebody psychoanalyzing Drake, you might as well skip the beef portion. Now, I'm going to be very critical, but I'm also going to give these guys their flowers because I think these guys really do make up for the things that they might be weak at, right? You get what I'm trying to say? We're just trying to get a balanced take going on here and really have a genuine conversation about hip hop. And if you're going to disagree with me, hey, light me up in the comments. Tell me what you disagree with, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. Why am I telling you all this? Why am I giving you the disclaimer? But because that's like when we're psychoanalyzing people, we have to see what people do well, what people are terrible at handling, what flaws they may have, and what things from the audience or maybe their team enables them. You get what I'm saying? You got it? All right, cool. Let's go. So what did we say earlier? The consensus is hip hop right now is competitive. Well, it's always been competitive. In my opinion, a lot of people, they see Kendrick Lamar as a person that embodies that aspect of competition, right? Now, while I agree to a certain extent, I have some perspectives on this, right? Now, although I believe hip hop truly is competitive, that does not mean that how competition is addressed won't breed consequences, right? Since the days of Control, a record from Kendrick Lamar, Big Sean, and Jay Electronica, I've always had my eyes on Kendrick Lamar's approach to competition, right? Like, while his mates were trying to cultivate their relationship and figure out how to coexist, doing things like buying each other's CDs and offering features and, going on tour with each other, Kendrick, well, he's interesting. He was doing those things early on, but he always seemed to have an edge. Now, he was willing to politic with a J. Cole and have J. Cole produce songs and look like they were building what seems to be a general relationship. But when I would hear him on rap records, his sentiments, he always came off like a pit bull, a straight, hungry, aggressive pit. Now that I've seen how he moved in a battle, it's all making sense. Right? Like, I can't help but think, was Kendrick being held back by TDE? Like, if not being held back, he always came off like an individual, just itching to compete, and he was waiting for somebody to, you know what I mean? But here's the thing, that does play well in hip hop, but Kendrick's demeanor never fooled me. I mean, yeah, the human being might be a nice guy. Don't get me twisted. That's not what we're here to do, right? Or we are here to do that, sort of. But like 50 Cent once said, it's not a mistake that Kendrick Lamar made it.
Kendrick is always going to be a media darling. And I told him, I said, because he has the ability to make you believe he had no idea this was going to happen. Like, I look at him and I go, nah, you can't do that to me.
When I see Kendrick Lamar, the rapper, I think of a young MC ducking strays at the Nickerson, right? A West Coast Paru gangster rap influenced battle rapper. And for all the hip hop purists, this sounds good. Right? They love this stuff, right? For the younger crowd who loves him and aspire to, be a purist or maybe even be like him, he fills a void, right? For me, though, he can often come off like he's Debo or plain Debo amongst a generation of MCs not as interested in direct conflict. Now, my thing is, it sort of checks out when you think about these eras of MCs who were alive for the demise of Big and Pac. I mean, most of these guys are older than me. The heavyweight battle between Jay and Nas, they saw people like Ja Rule get knocked off by 50 Cent. I could see how it can make these guys a bit apprehensive, but I could also see how it would make someone like Kendrick Lamar comfortable in being war ready, like itching for it, right? But let's talk about how we see that playing out and how we see his peers being a bit different from him, right? Like I can see how J. Cole, also seeing these things, may want to pursue peace and thinks beefing with a rapper, if he's got to do it, it has to be legit, a la Middle Child. And I can see how it makes Drake lean into being more like Jay-Z, right? Leaning into subliminals until war is unavoidable. Right? I mean, we saw what happened with Jay, but we'll get to that. Now, being the opposite of his peers, in my opinion, is why we get a record like Control, a record by Big Sean that features Jay Electronica and Kendrick Lamar. Now, while Big Sean and Jay Electronica's verses were pretty good on the song, Kendrick Lamar's verse sent shockwaves throughout the rap world. I mean, this verse saw Kendrick directly calling out his peers, saying he wanted to make sure that core fans never heard of him. And then he asks, what is competition? I'm trying to take the ball higher. But anyway, I was outside for this verse. Okay, that was about 12 years ago. I was outside for this verse. And it shook up the entire rap world. Like, it had some people understanding it, they understood it, and some people did not. I mean, there's a story that allegedly Diddy pressed Kendrick about this line in which Kendrick said that he was the king of New York. Machiavelli's offspring. I'm the king of New York. I'm a Muslim or punk. Anyway, but the thing is, with pressing Kendrick Lamar, the story goes that J. Cole intervened, right? And that it may have been what led to J. Cole and Diddy's scuffle. Now, that part's important because clearly, if you're intervening for somebody, you've got to have some kind of relationship. We'll talk about that a little later. We even find out later in a Big Sean interview that the reason this song was not on Big Sean's project was because TDE was uncomfortable with the noise around the record.
They didn't clear the song. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. After it came out, and I took that bullet for the culture, it didn't get cleared.
What you mean it didn't get cleared?
Like, the reason it wasn't on my album is because they didn't clear it.
TDE didn't clear it?
Yeah, because of all the controversy and drama.
We previously thought this record didn't make Big Sean's album because of a sampling issue. Maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know. But let's go with what Big Sean is saying. Now, of course, the individuals that had as much promise as Kendrick Lamar that were named on the record will constantly question about the verse. Jermaine Cole and Drake. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but how both Cole and Drake addressed Control gave us a little bit of context clues on how they would move in the great rap shinobi wars 10 plus years later, right? J. Cole had responded to Control on a Justin Timberlake song called TKO with words that you can interpret as him hearing and understanding the noise, but with a relationship still intact. I believe messages were sent between the two, and there was clarification that there was no friction, right?
Does Kendrick call J. Cole when the TKO remix comes out and you hear Cole's rap about how it felt to kind of hear Control?
Yeah, I definitely text him. Yeah.
But you compare this to when Kendrick Lamar does Like That, which I can only assume there's less communication between both individuals, and then that led to J. Cole recording and releasing 7 Minute Drill. Now, I understand Control and Like That aren't the same songs, but they share they share some similarities. Walk with me, right? The idea is after the release of 7 Minute Drill, a mutual friend of Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, allegedly, intervened, and that led to J. Cole apology. You see the connection I just made there? J. Cole hears Control, goes, huh? Text message is sent directly with Kendrick. Cole goes, okay, I understand, whatever. I'm just gonna record my TKO verse, sort of, somewhat in jest. But you hear like that, not direct relationship, communication is slower. I'm gonna record 7 minutes. It's not in jest. I'm gonna attack your catalog. It's a diss. But then communication comes in. J. Cole goes, oh no, never mind. Right? You get what I'm trying to say. Now, Drake, on the other hand, he catches a lot of flack for having the only sensitive response to Control. And while it is true to an extent, there were multiple interviews that he took some shots.
Are you listening to it now at this point in time? Okay. And then it was real cool for like, you know, a couple weeks. But like if I asked you, for example, like how does that verse start?
But there were also interviews where he would speak well of Kendrick in a verse, and then he would downplay it again.
After Kendrick's thing, you wouldn't. I noticed you didn't really get into that too much. So
I just like I don't know. It just wasn't real to me. It's like I saw him after that, and it was just like love. So it's like, was that real or was that just like for the people? You know what I mean?
I think it's a sparring kind of sport.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, you know, then let it be real. Then, you know, I mean, because those were harsh words, right?
I think his biggest fault was being indecisive about the verse and being available, being Drake, an artist out there with a buzz, with an album to promote, being interviewed left and right about Control, right? That's leaving too much room for error, in my opinion. See, the feelings about Control that Drake would have on certain interviews, they're very reminiscent of the rumors that Drake took lines on Like That a certain way, right? A song Like That with Future, Metro Boomin, Kendrick Lamar featuring. We'll talk about that a lot more. But anyway, and also Drake seems like he's coming off a bit indecisive about the line, I'm snatching chains and burning tattoos, and whether or not that's a threat. It reminds me again in the interview where Drake says, well, I saw him and I asked him, is this real? You know, it's kind of wanting to gauge things a bit. That seems similar to how Drake wanted to gauge the snatching chains and burning tattoos line. But to me, though, for both records, I think that energy, the words there is just Kendrick Lamar again being that pit bull, right? Saying he's gonna snatch chains and burns tattoos or that he wants to murder his peers is just Kendrick Lamar's excessive hyperbole. And well, in the real world, we would tell people to be aware of that and cognizant of how that hyperbole can breed consequences. But in rap, there's some different rules in rap, man. It's what the purists love. Now, here's the bill for Drake, right? In my opinion, I have this weird conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat time, that Kendrick wrote Control primarily to signify that he was ready to outdo Drake and J. Cole. But he was coy enough to include the rest of the up-and-comers. Like, I refuse to believe in 2013 Kendrick couldn't recognize who the real threats to the throne were, right? I mean, rest in peace to Mac Miller. All respects to A$AP Rocky. Wale is a good person you could point to that was, you know, hot. And he dealt with some industry issues. Meek Mill's another good MC you could point out. I mean, Big Crit. We got a few more. You guys can name them all in the comments, but they don't check the boxes off the way J. Cole and Drake do, in my opinion. And also remember, during that time, it wasn't all kumbaya, right? I'm going to do and draw a connection here. Just walk with me. So thanks to MTV and their list of hottest MCs at the time, which Drake was ranked 5th, J. Cole was nowhere to be found. Both men would join together to address this list, and some say take shots at Kendrick on a record called Jodeci's Back, which is a freestyle. And when I think about the timing of all of this and the way Kendrick Lamar responded on Control, it's just kind of a brilliant move, right? Because when I think back to Jodeci's Back, I think of Drake saying things like, let's not argue about who the best MC. We know that you're not. Well, MTV just said I'm the hottest MC. Or maybe it's just an entendre. Maybe it's just a double. And then J. Cole says, F your list. Right? Now, what caught heat the most on that record was J. Cole's line about artistic and autistic. That also got that track scrubbed out really quick before it was done again, released with the lines taken out. But walk with me here, right? You got a pit bull who is hyper competitive, can sniff out your moves. Of course he's going to counter, right? And it reminds me a little bit of First Person Shooter, another record with Drake and J. Cole. And when you think about it, there's room to be able to say, there might be some shots there, and or this is just two elite MCs again, joining together, teaming up, and Kendrick Lamar, the hyper-competitive pitbull, was not involved, so he got angry. On First Person Shooter, you hear Drake saying, it's just you and Cole, while J. Cole is doing his best impression to try to involve Kendrick. You know what I'm saying? But still saying right now, I feel like I'm Muhammad Ali. Similar to Jodeci's Back. Drake is standing on who's the best MC. They say that you're not, right after that list comes out. But J. Cole is like, I just want to let you guys know that I don't care about that list. I could see how Kendrick Lamar, the hyper-competitive pit bull, could take offense to this. Any little thing, I'm on go. And I feel like you're being a little manipulative. Right? Now, but again, in addition, I will consider Drake's ego, right? Because while some people may see Kendrick Lamar's move on Control as just general competition, he just called out his mates for no reason. What if Drake spotted something else and he saw what I saw in the Pitbull? It's either one, Drake knew he was sending shots and the Pitbull caught it, or Drake wasn't sending shots and his ego comes into play. And what do I mean by that? Well, see, to a guy like Drake, he really sees competition to him. If it's not real and it's competition, I want to compete in the things that matter to me, right? Not just throwing words on record. I want to compete with guys like innovators and charting phenoms at the time, Kanye West.
I still like, when it comes to competition, I'm more worried about consistency. I'm more worried about bodies of work. I'm basically talking about, like, you know, there's one guy who's up every night thinking about how to get better and how to do things bigger. And, you know, that's Kanye West. He's like, he's always going to be the guy that's trying to out.
I mean, it also doesn't help that I think, quite frankly, at that time, Drake thought he was a bit above Kendrick as a peer. I mean, it sounds insane now, but go back to 2013 and you could look at it like this. To Drake at the time, to him, Jay-Z and Kanye were all sort of seniors in the rap high school. Wayne was a junior in a rap high school, right? Or you can go the other way around, say Jay-Z and Nas were seniors in a rap high school. Kanye and Wayne were juniors in a rap high school. I feel like a sophomore, and you, Kendrick Lamar, you're a freshman. I'm approaching my third album. You just only dropped Good Kid, Mad City. I took you on tour, put you on my interlude before your debut. Why can't I think you're just Lil Bro? You understand what I'm saying? Now, things also didn't cool down when Drake apparently went in on Kendrick Lamar in a never released Sports Nation interview. Now, it's a tall ask, but I'm thinking everyone is pretty PR savvy, right? Like, that's just something that if you do, you know that it's going to get back to the people that you're talking about. Now, information did come out later about this interview. Go look it up. So Drake also did give Kendrick Lamar some bars on The Language, a record on Nothing Was the Same, which he used subliminals. Kendrick made sure to respond on the BET Cypher.
Yeah, and nothing been the same since they dropped Control and tucked the sense of the rapper back in his pajama clothes.
Right? Drake sent more shots on a record called Shit with Future, and Kendrick again shot back on a record called Pay For It with J-Rock. And so the subliminals battle begins, right? Now, remember when I sort of talked about mentioning names and how Kendrick Lamar said Drake, J. Cole, and the rest of his rap mates' names. I want to talk about saying people's names in vitriol, right? Let's talk about the last time I can recall an MC saying others' names like Kendrick Lamar did on Control. In the year 1999, a gully, gritty, hungry MC from New York released a song called How to Rob. That MC's name was 50 Cent. Now, in the year 2025, you know 50 Cent as a successful but very confrontational MC. Well, in 1999, he had all that confrontation, but little to no success. I mean, he knew he needed something.
What is with that track? You still got
you know what?
dudes
How
coming at
to
you?
Rob is, I'll explain it. At the time, I'm on Columbia Records. I got a release date coming, and there's no buzz surrounding the record. When you're in my situation, there's no plan B. You know, it's music or we sell crack. Because that's what we did before we did music, you know? So I'm like, I gotta make a record that makes everybody stop right now and say, who's this guy 50 Cent?
And now remember when I said 50 Cent said he could read Kendrick's true nature, especially as a rapper? Okay, yeah. Well, I think now that I think about 50 Cent releasing How to Rob and his confrontational nature, it all makes sense, right? So 50 Cent releases How to Rob, and How to Rob is a record. How do I describe How to Rob? It's a record in which 50 Cent does this wishful-like thinking on how he's gonna rob the entire music industry and rob these MCs that are richer than him because he just can't afford to be broke. Luckily, though, for 50, he did add someone named D. Angelette, aka the Mad Rapper, who gave the record a bit of, I guess we can call it, a comedic tone. This, however, didn't stop people from being upset that their name was being mentioned. Big Pun was unhappy about the name drop. Ghostface and RZA from The Woo were tight. Missy Elliott, another person, side-eyeing 50 Cent. And also, I remember Jay-Z punched back on another record. I'm about $1. What the F is 50 Cent? But anyway, so it's safe to say name dropping, it should be done with a little bit of caution, right? Context does matter, but you got to be careful with people's names. Something in 2013, I don't think Kendrick cared for because, again, when it comes to this quest for the rap throne and being the it guy in rap, he was truly hungry, a ruthless pit bull that was willing to bite and chew through anything, almost like 50 Cent on How to Rob. Now, my belief is, to temper this feeling, Kendrick could have went on a J. Cole-like run late in his career and just body every song as a guest feature, right? That's being competitive, right? And who has the best pen. But in defense of Kendrick, though, I do recall him doing something that I would love to see more rappers do when they compete in hip-hop, if not in a battle. In a series called Black Friday, well, it wasn't really a series, it was just one swap, in which Kendrick swapped beats with J. Cole, with him absolutely destroying the Tales of Two City beats from J. Cole's Forest Hill Drive album, and Cole doing a pretty good job on Kendrick Lamar's All Right song off the To Pimp a Butterfly album. Now, I personally think Kendrick outshines Cole on a technical level back then. I believe J. Cole has caught up since then, but that's another combo for another day. But it's clear that that was not enough for Kendrick, you know, as we try to finish up this psychoanalysis, right? I think of the time Kendrick screams on GNX on TV off, it's not enough. And that's how I feel about his knack for competition. I mean, this guy, he not only wants to be seen as the alpha and the omega of all of this, he wants whatever's beyond that. Whenever you think of rhymers, he's starving for this shit. Luckily for him, though, he's in the best craft to be in with that type of attitude. You take Kendrick Lamar and this competitive edge and take him outside of, I don't know, hip hop or sports, that guy becomes unbearable. Especially with that type of attitude. But eventually, all that talk wasn't without reason, because he got a chance to prove why he was that hungry in a battle. Okay, so we decided people want to compete. Some care about record sales. Some care about the charts, innovation. Some care about having the best verse on a song. And I gave you examples of just pure competition in hip hop, which are common, but not necessarily always events, right? J. Cole, Kendrick, Black Friday. That makes sense. Kanye saying he's going to compete with 50 Cent. That's one I want to throw in there. And actually, no, 50 Cent saying he wanted to compete with Kanye on who would have the best first week sales. I believe Kanye actually was not interested in doing that type of competition. But alas, Kanye would win. And I believe that's also another video for another day, because I think that ushered a different era in rap, right? And now we also know that we've seen others go head to head, but not intentionally with first week sales. Kanye and 50 was intentional. Now, we have J. Cole and Kendrick swapping beats, like we said. We have Eminem and Jay-Z on Renegade. Those debates are still going on, who had the best verse. And whether intentional or not, people use that as a measuring stick for both men's pen in terms of Jay-Z and Eminem. Now, we don't need to chronicle much on competition, as the idea is it naturally just exists in hip hop, right? Even people in the same rap groups tend to compete on who has the best verse. So we're all in agreement. Competition exists in rap. With all of this said, though, it's clearly not enough. It doesn't stop there, right? The competition in hip hop tends to go to another realm, whether because of the gladiator-like environment created or because of perceived slights. As MCs eventually get to battling each other face to face, or going record for record, songs for songs, attacking each other. If you can't tell, we're in the battle portion right now, right? And one MC that I can't quite figure out when it comes to battles is J. Cole. So I guess it's best we use this time to analyze them and try to figure out what J. Cole really feels about battling in hip hop and understand more about battling in hip hop. Say what you want to say about Kendrick Lamar and his thirst for audio blood. He seems at least committed to the bit and is okay with the competition to battle to beef pipeline, right? J. Cole, on the other hand, I think he wants nothing to do with the battle and beef portion. Well, he kind of says he does on records. I think that's just tough guy talk. But then he says he wouldn't get into a battle unless it's legit. He seems conflicted about the whole thing. And in terms of competition, I believe he prefers to sit in the pocket of let's go verse for verse on the same songs, or maybe different songs. We swap beats and we'll see who's better. And that's noble and somewhat of a pure approach. For J. Cole, that's unfortunate. You're in a gladiator-like sport, brother. I mean, that's not going to cut it. And he really has an indecisiveness about this whole thing. Hey, you take, for example, on Forest Hill Drive, it's one of my favorite J. Cole albums, right? On the intro, he leans into saying he's the best. By the middle of the album, on Fire Squad, he says things like, you know, he's the best in the West. And I'm like, oh, God, J. Cole, do you know the pit bull from the West Coast is watching? But then by the outro, he says he's happy to be pairs. And, you know, he's so honored and happy to be pairs with these guys. And, but then you go back to the middle where he says, you know, while we're arguing about the crown, white people are coming and steal hip hop. And I guess, I don't know, maybe that's the duality of a man and he's human. And it's also why I kind of say J. Cole is the realest guy in rap. I know I've said that before and people attack me because he's real. That's a real thing. A lot of us, we don't get to just be quote unquote, tough guy, hip hoppy all the time. We all have conflicting feelings.
I remember you was conflicted.
But anyway, we get to see the indecisiveness of J. Cole after Kendrick Lamar releases Like That, right? And he was on the clock. He would go on to release a track called 7 Minute Drill, like a track to me that seems like it's a series of temper jabs and a record he would eventually remove from the World Wide Webs and essentially apologize to Kendrick Lamar and everyone else for it at the Dreamville Festival. I have no problem with the apology. I have a problem with him choosing to release the track in the first place. I mean, I respect J. Cole as an MC and quite frankly also as a human. And I respect the fact that he can admit when he's wrong. But I feel he's way too knowledgeable of a rap student to not have known how to deal with this attack from Kendrick Lamar. But hold on, pause. Let's pivot for a bit, right? Because what if he didn't know? What if he didn't know how to deal with battling in rap? To know the rules of engagement and to know and understand battle in rap, we have to first know the history, right? We can trace back some of the history of battling in person to the 1980s when MCs like Busy B and Kumo D went at it live on stage at Harlem World in New York City. Now, it wasn't necessarily a face-to-face battle as you know it now, kind of like you see in your URL leagues. Actually, let me explain. See, back then, MCing was mostly known to be about moving the crowd. So yes, master of ceremony, so we can say move the crowd, MC, that's a triple. But back then, battles were about rocking a crowd, saying to the hip, to the hip, to the hip, to the head, etc. And then we take turns. I do that. I try to move the crowd. You try to move the crowd. We say a bunch of things. You see who did it better. And that's how we decide a winner. This was the norm for someone like Busy B, who was a star at this point, right? He was more of a party MC though, right? Some people even knew him to bite lines and things like that. He was more of your, mumble MCs that we talk about now. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, I should mention Busy B at the time. His words were clear, but you get my point. Kumo D, however, well, oh brother, that guy, he was from a new era of MCs, right? Who, in my opinion, what made these guys special is they had incorporated the games of playing the dozens, right? Or what some of you might know as clowning, roasting, joshing, right? And they had the ability to not only entertain the crowd, but they were adding some harmless or harmful, witty lines about other MCs. And that would also generate additional reactions from the crowd and hopefully the other MC. Now, on this day at Harlem World, Busy B did his usual thing. You know what I'm saying? He talked trash. He was braggadocious. But then one heckler pointed out, hey, you couldn't beat anybody in here, because Busy B was saying, I could beat anybody in here. I'm Busy B. I mean, this guy really thought he was Muhammad Ali. And they said, well, you can't beat Kumo D. But Busy B, of course, kind of shrugged that off. And Kumo D, who was nearby, heard that. And he took offense to this and decided to sign himself up, on a little sign-up sheet. I don't know, they didn't have cell phones at the time. They had a sign-up sheet. Get over it, right? So anyway, Busy B, because he's overconfident and he thinks he's that guy, decides to go ahead and grab a drink, right? He had already rocked the house. He tore the party down. And Kumo D said, okay, today is that day. Now, Kumo D gets on the mic and he starts off not only ripping on Busy B, I mean, he's flipping his name, his gimmicks, but then he's outright cutting this guy up about stuff that he might know about him. And I'm like, whoa, go look up the tape. It sounds crazy and witty for the 80s. But anyway, as Kumo D's doing this, Busy B, people run up to him as he's grabbing his drink to say, hey, Mr. Overconfident MC, something serious is going down. You're getting humiliated. So unlike Will's 100-point game, I said there is tape on this. So you go ahead and Google that up. That tape, that moment would change the course of hip hop battling history. It birthed a different era of battling. It also set what probably should have been a standard for MCs after a battle. You know, you play the dozens, you shake hands, and maybe become friends after, as Busy Bee and Kumo D became, right? But for what it's worth, we do see this nowadays in structured battle leagues like URL sometimes, but we can also see the opposite. You get the point. And Kumo D versus Busy Bee's battle was a great reference point for a history of face-to-face battles for me, right? Now, to understand the history of battling on records, however, we got to go back to another time. And it's a time of the Roxanne Wars. Now, remember earlier what I said about rappers and names? Lock in. So, in about 1984, a group called UTFO released Roxanne. This is a song about, guess who? Yeah, a song about a woman named Roxanne. But here's the deal. Roxanne wasn't giving the group any play. Roxanne wasn't giving the members of the group the time of day, or so the story goes, right? Now, if you're wondering, though, Roxanne was a fictional character. She didn't exist, right? This person never existed. UTFO was just getting creative, you know, an imaginary person named Roxanne. Somebody that did exist, though, was a 13-year-old girl named Lolita Shantae Gooden. Now, she's commonly known as Roxanne Shantae now, but back then she wasn't. Anyway, Lolita was convinced by DJ Marley Marl, who had a tiny bone to pick with UTFO, to record a response to Roxanne. Her name wasn't even Roxanne. How are you responding to something that's not real, that is not even your name? There's no plausible deniability, but whatever. Her name is Roxanne now, all right? So she used her imagination to write and record a response to the original UTFO song, right? Pretty much dissing the guy's back and explaining her side of the story as to why she did not give the UTFO members any play. At this time, I think she's 14. Why is a 14-year-old Why is a 14-year-old responding back to grown men? I mean, okay, whatever. I'm guessing 1984 was a very odd time. The record that she made was called Roxanne's Revenge. Now, this record took off. And although there were dramas about, copyright issues and, the song being recorded over the UTFO beat, over the radio, obscenities, etc., it was eventually handled. And the record labels figured it out because, record labels are never to be left out of the profits that could come out of a rap beef. Mind you, I want you to note that because this is going to be important a little later. Now, while we note that it's important, right, that we recognize that even since the beginning of battle records, record labels have always wanted to be involved in disc records. Soon after, money, the streets, record labels will encourage this to keep going because UTFO would release their own response to Roxanne's response titled The Real Roxanne. And this time, though, it's not necessarily a diss back, but it was filled with a bit of shade and attempt to step on a 14-year-old's record. And what they did was they included another girl who also wasn't named Roxanne, but they wanted everyone to consider her the real Roxanne. God, I'm losing my mind. Anyway, are you keeping track? If I say Roxanne one more time. Anyway, so the record was first done with UTFO and a lady named Elise Jack, right? But she was then replaced with Adelaida Martinez, who apparently fit the mold of what Roxanne should really look like. But at this point, okay, I'm tired of saying Roxanne. My head hurts. The streets, though, they're not tired of this, and things start buzzing. All these records are working, right? So other people decide, well, I want to make my own version of a Roxanne song. And that's why we have the Roxanne Wars. So at that point, we got a bunch of Roxanne songs. Our 14-year-old, Roxanne Shante, responds with another record called Bite This, in which she not only gave UTFO some jabs, but oh my God, why is a 14-year-old, it's just a female 1980s Kendrick Lamar? But anyway, she gives UTFO some lines, and she let other MCs such as Run DMC, LL Cool J know that they could get it too if they want it. Okay, this is a very vicious 14-year-old. But Roxanne Part 2 was then released by UTFO, and this time they do officially attack Roxanne and her looks. Roxanne responds with Queen of Rocks. And through all this, though, there's a rap group called the East Coast Crew who made a song called Final Word, No More Roxanne, pretty much begging everyone to stop with the yapping about Roxanne. And I feel like them right now. Okay, Roxanne Shante, though, our phenom 14-year-old at the time, she's about 55 years old now, and she has a documentary called Roxanne on Netflix. I recommend that you should watch that. And she touches on that time period of her life with a lot more accuracy than I'm probably giving you right now. She also mentions in that same doc how she's on good terms with members of the UTFO like Kango Kid, and he's named in the interview. So we see at its inception that, there are examples of MCs that can go at it, whether in person on stage or on records, and be cool afterwards. Which takes us back to J. Cole and his now deleted track, 7 Minute Drill, which was a response to Kendrick Lamar's record Like That. Now, there are certain things that some people point out that they don't like about the record. J. Cole claims about Kendrick Lamar's discography, which, in my opinion, is a bit misleading, right? J. Cole was taking, shots at something that Kendrick is really strong at. And while I disagree with J. Cole's statements, I understood that this is the tongue-in-cheek nature of Playing the Dozens. But I am puzzled, however, at J. Cole's retraction, because I don't believe he said anything on that record that both MCs couldn't come back from. So why apologize? The alleged story is that, as I said, J. Cole met with a mutual friend, Schoolboy Q, at the Dreamville Festival, who gave J. Cole a heads up about how this battle and this conflict may eventually shape up, and how it's possible he may have not been the intended target on Like That. I do struggle with that theory, though, because I remember on Like That, Kendrick Lamar has a stick line which references a song that Dreamville has called Steak, in which J. Cole has one of the best verses I've ever heard. But okay, let's assume that was Kendrick's way of shooting a stray at someone that was standing next to the intended target. Remember, we said it earlier, Kendrick is Debo. You know what I mean? But if you take J. Cole's words on stage that day at face value, you gotta just accept that whether the words were mean or not, he really just couldn't sleep at night, right? Now, again, I want to specify that I have no problem with J. Cole's apology. And I can live with the retraction. That's growth. That's being an adult and admitting a misstep, right? I have an issue more so, like I said earlier, with the release of the track in the first place, not sticking with what he said on Middle Child. Remember, if I beef with a rapper, it's going to be legit. Now, I know some of you are asking, well, how does J. Cole handle a Debo like Kendrick Lamar while sticking to his morals? Unfortunately, J. Cole couldn't afford to be quiet and not say anything, because remember, he went on multiple feature runs claiming he was that guy, ready for smoke, ready for anybody, right? And if he's not going to engage in a full-on battle, my advice looking back now, hindsight being 2020, is properly assess the threat of Like That, properly assess what the audience is making it out to be, and properly assess what this really lands like for you, what it really means for you. And now for J. Cole, I get it. It felt vicious, maybe. right? That's why you run into the studio and immediately record 7-minute drill. But let's be honest, if what he said on Middle Child is accurate, like that to me is not real beef. So when you say on First Person Shooter, we're the big three, like we started a league, but right now I feel like Muhammad Ali, and Kendrick Lamar says, well, ain't no big three, it's just Big Me. The next escalation for me is not necessarily a diss song. In my opinion, hey, Cole, you got to send a 1 to 3 line bop, 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 bop on the feature just like Kendrick did, responding back to like that. Now, I'm going to trademark this. I'm going to copyright this. Don't none of y'all steal this, but something easily like Cole could have went on a record with another artist as a feature and say, hey, somebody tell Dot that big three shit is courtesy. Cole numero uno is everybody else under me. And that's a easy handle of letting Debo know that he's not going to bully you, letting the crowd know I heard what was said, and also letting you yourself deep down inside know, hey, I handled what I had to handle. That beef is not real beef. I'm not getting a full war of words with this guy, right? You validate that previous stance of saying, hey, I'm not engaging with somebody unless it's truly beef, right? You reiterate that you're the best. And at least at worst, you buy yourself some time to get that communication with Kendrick Lamar that I think you really sometimes truly need. Now, let me be clear and be a little critical of Kendrick Lamar on this. I've talked about it in another video with Kendrick Lamar and Big Sean, how there were communication issues there. Remember, I referenced a Big Sean interview earlier. I do think that lack of communication by Kendrick Lamar is something that can often be confusing for a lot of rappers in the game. I made a full video on this. I'll try to link it for you guys. Now, anyway, let me be clear, though. I don't think that a friendly fade between J. Cole and Kendrick would have been bad for the sport, right? It may actually have been good. It might actually have been better than what we recently just saw, but I'm speaking for Cole here. Remember, we're psychoanalyzing J. Cole. We're trying to figure out what makes him tick, what would have worked for him, while trying to understand the nuances of battling, right? And for Cole, he just has to be better at navigating this sport, right? Because it has a funny way of moving you from competition to battle to beefs very quickly. Now, okay, let's play another angle at this. Let's assume J. Cole wasn't being flawed here, and Kendrick Lamar's Like That song was a launching pad that truly warrant a war. But I want to analyze, why did it cause all of this noise and ruckus in the rap world? See, like Control, it was a Future record, right? In which Kendrick Lamar took over the record as a feature, right? But I think there's something else I want to point out about Like That in defense of Cole and for anyone else that thinks this should have warranted a war. Because unlike Control, it did feature a hook. And it had club appeal thanks to Metro Boomin and Future, the crooner. Let me tell you guys something. There's just something about when you're hearing a club record and someone is dissing you. It does something else to you. You go outside and you hear that record of someone dissing you. You see the girls with the bottles and the dudes with the sparklers. Ain't no big three. It's just Big Me. It does something to you, because at the end of the day, I don't think this should have been the first time Drake and J. Cole should have known, hey, that Pitbull is on one. Because I think about records like Family Ties, in which I think Kendrick was taking his shots. I mean, they weren't as direct as Like That. They weren't a diss. But again, this is not the first time you've known this Pitbull is ready to do this. I mean, even on that song, Family Ties, now that I think about it, 10 for a Hat, Baby Keem of all people was sending shots at Cole and Drake. I'm so serious. But anyway, that's probably another story for another day, right? And unlike Control, Like that, also, it narrowed in the two targets. Control was coy as Big Sean McMill, Tyler McMillan. No. Like that is I've got smoke for these two guys who are buddying and in my opinion are taking shots at me, right? And although what I said earlier about Control was more of a conspiracy, this one, there's no conspiracy about this, right? And it also happened quite literally a decade after subliminals between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. And some speculation about subs between Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole as well. Okay. So what do we have? J. Cole bites the bullet. He releases a 7-minute drill, takes it back, and apologizes. Now is a good time, though, to remind people that this wasn't the first apology in a rap battle. See, well, it wasn't the same type of apology, but some may even consider this apology a bit justified, right? Walk with me. In 2001, Nas and Jay-Z went into a battle that came from what? I don't know, guys. We just have to guess. Competition again. See, New York City is a big but small place at the same time, right? And now I'm adjacent to New York City, so I think I'm qualified enough to tell you guys what New York City is like, especially with hip hop, right? You got to consider a few things. Biggie, DMX, Nas, Jay-Z, Big L, The Wu, Mobb Deep, Fat Joe, so many other MCs, right? All come from the same area. And they all come up usually at the same time. You have to understand they all walked around with an edge, a desire to not only be the king of the city, but the king of rap. Now, between Nas and Jay, we're assuming, okay, they both have this edge, being from New York, wanting to be competitive, wanting to be king of the city. I do want to note there were some attempts towards collaboration, right? Nas, who was the hip hop golden child at the time, he was supposed to show up for a feature on Jay-Z's song Bring It On, right? He apparently didn't show up for that session. Jay-Z, though, would then sample his song, The World Is Yours, for another song called Dead Presidents. And then somewhere along the line, maybe due to the snub of the studio session or the use of Nas's sample that Nas may have minded. Remember, Jay famously said during the height of the battle, I sampled your voice, you were using it wrong. But anyway, we then get a subliminal shot from Nas about Lexus with TVs being the minimum. See, just the little things like this in hip hop, because Jay-Z was known at the time for having an affinity for Lexuses. You know, this was his thing. He always rapped about Lexuses. Now, Nas later did confirm that he was thinking of Hov when he wrote that line, but that it wasn't necessarily a shot. Okay, so you're walking with me. I'm gonna get to the apology, but now if you can't peep game, I'm telling you about Jay-Z and Nas. So Jay samples Nas again. Oh God, that sounds like it'll make someone irritated, especially if they're not the one clearing the samples. You see where I'm going? Okay, that probably made Nas irritated again. But eventually, Memphis Bleek, who's Jay-Z's right-hand man, he does a record called Memphis Bleek Is, which is a bit of a biting of a song that Nas already had called Nas Is Like. And when you think of it, I think I understand why this whole beef is starting. But anyway, Nas on Nostradamus fires back because he can see this stuff. He can see these subs. Memphis Bleek responds again on My Mind Right, which he alludes to Nas's album It Was Written. Then Nas responds back with the Stillmatic freestyle, a freestyle which he goes into naming the whole Rockefeller clique, and he gives everyone a nice jab. So if you're not paying attention, we went from competing to battling very, very quickly. See, with this escalation from Nas and naming Jay-Z by name, it's safe to say that it was time for the big dog, Jay, to take over for Memphis Bleak and handle business. Jay would perform a record titled Takeover at Summer Jam in 2001, in June. And this Summer Jam is a concert hosted by New York City radio station Hot 97. During that performance, he launches shots at Prodigy, of Mobb Deep. They also had an issue. Remember, I told you New York is competitive. I mean, it was pretty trivial. It had to do with people critiquing in magazines and things like that. But Hov would eventually post at Summer Jam a picture of Prodigy in a dance outfit from his younger days. Now, Jay didn't release all of Takeover that day at Summer Jam, right? But there's a line there that says, ask Nas, he don't want it with Hov. And that's all the crowd needed to hear to know what was up. Now, Jay would eventually release the entire record on his studio album, which was called Blueprint, released September 11th of 2001. Yes, 9/11. The early 2000s were a hell of a time. It was, man. Now, you're probably wondering why the gap, right? Well, things moved way slower back then. It's not the internet age. It's not the digital age. We're all just not recording and just releasing tracks the very next day. People have to do roll out. It was different, okay? I mean, unless you were going to go back there and go record your verse in a radio station, do a freestyle dissing, or maybe put it out on a mixtape that would be sold on street corners. It was just a different time. You know, it was a slower process of recording, mixing, mastering, and then printing CDs out for the record company. So Jay has this record out now, and it's been bubbling since June. Nas, on the other hand, was plotting his response, right? I mean, although it was for the times, it does make sense now that I think about it, not to strategically, jump out the gate. Now, he didn't know for certain the full extent of how much Jay was gunning for him on that record, unless he heard a leak. But by September, he would know, right? It was apparent that Nas needed to respond without holding back. Nas was being spoken about as an MC at the time who had in ways fell off a bit from his earlier status as hip-hop's golden child. You know, having to hear all this noise for the last few months, that had to have been hell for Nas. But thankfully, there were no social media commentators and, people counting down how long you took before you responded. Now, Nas would respond, though, on December 4th, 2001. I know this because it's Jay-Z's birthday. One of the greatest diss records ever recorded in rap. That record was titled Ether. Ether was good. It was good. And as a secretary treasury of the Jay-Z fan club, the Avengers, imagine how great that record had to be for me to tell you that it was good, right? Nas quickly turned the tides of the battle. And in my opinion, this is when I think this battle was shifting to beef. Not full on when I see you, I'll harm you beef, but I definitely don't like you anymore type of beef, right? Interestingly enough, the version of Ether that we heard was supposedly a more tame version than the original. Two versions existed, one on a pretty whack beat and the other with more vile lines. And, people were advising us to either go on a different beat and advising them that, hey, those lines, you're going a bit too far. I believe there was a line about a Lee on a plane or something like that. That would have been a bit much. Now, I personally still think Ether is a bit vile, right? And Jay-Z would respond. He responded on a freestyle titled Super Ugly. Now, I like Super Ugly. Some people, it's up in the air for them. And it seems like on Super Ugly, he wanted to escalate things past what Nas had said. Nas had implied that Jay-Z was a homosexual, and Jay-Z felt this escalation warranted the levels that he would take it to next, right? Which was to insinuate that he had slept with Nas's baby mother. The gloves were off. Quite literally, he says that on a song. Now, at this point, to me, this is beef. You're talking about people's family. You're talking about people's baby mother. This is beef, right? I mean, this is beef. This is beef. At this point, this is past who, is better, who sold more records. This is the territory of, if I see you, we have to have a conversation. If not with this, at least with our fists. Now, interestingly enough, though, after the release of Super Ugly, Jay would apologize for his words. And why? Why did Jay apologize? Well, his mother, Gloria Carter, was not happy with where Jay had taken his battle. Jay-Z had ended up calling a radio station and explaining that he felt like Nas crossed lines on Ether, but however, he understands that the women and children had nothing to do with it, so they should have been left out.
It was warranted. You know what I'm saying? The disrespect was met with the disrespect, but I'm really sorry for for the other people involved. The other people involved.
Now, the difference with Jay-Z and his protege, J. Cole, that Jay actually did cross lines, right? I mean, he involved Nas's family, and to be honest, he crossed lines with someone he wasn't even close to at the time, right? And although I know, his mother was more of a motivating factor here, that did not stop the world of hip hop from being taken aback, all right? And although it wasn't to the level that the J. Cole apology rocked the genre, it was still something that people talked about. Now, the apology, in my opinion, brought this beef back to the battle realm. Does that make sense? Because both men would still continue to trade barbs until their peace treaty in 2005. Yeah. Some people still recall the classic records to come out of the battle as well as the apology. But what I find peculiar was how Jay and Nas's conflict did not result in violence, right? Whether we can attribute this to Jay-Z's mother or maybe the understanding from both MCs who lost their peers in Biggie and Pac, there clearly was a competition to battle to beef escalation and then beef to battle de-escalation, right? Now, J. Cole lived through this era, so he's most likely aware of all this history, but he also is noted of somewhat clashing with people like Lil Pump, Biggie, disagreements with No Name in which he expresses himself on records. And some people do point to these interactions as, J. Cole willing to punch down. I don't necessarily see it that way because in my opinion, all these interactions, if you deep them, they can be explained as misunderstandings and or trolling and just some young MCs who probably also out of line step into them. People, however, do like to point to these inconsistencies and use it as times where J. Cole would walk things back. And remember what I said, being indecisive again, right? Because he clearly wasn't willing to consider feelings of a rapper like Biggie, who he would take nice little plucks at. I wouldn't even call them shots, on freestyles with little one-liners. Okay, so where we at? See, if I get one thing through J. Cole's mind, I would say that unlike what he said on the song Middle Child, I do think he has to be cognizant of the fact that you can battle in hip hop without hate or even legitimate issues or problem. It just is from competition. And I know that J. Cole is aware of that competition and where he wants it to stay, but he needs to know that that competition can lead to battling. And in fact, I will give you a few examples, this time more extensively, of battles that did not lead to beef. Right? Now, this list is somewhat long, so bear with me. And some of your uncles might have told you these were beefs, but some of them weren't real. It was all good. And cooler heads will eventually prevail, right? There's a lot of pump faking involved. Okay, here we go. One of my favorite battles, LL Cool J versus Cannabis. This one, I really, really love talking about this battle because it involved a veteran battle-tested MC, comfortable in the game, right? LL Cool J. And a younger MC who is newer to the game, who got an opportunity to be on the same song as LL Cool J. The song is titled 4321. And on that song, Cannabis, the young MC, asks LL Cool J about borrowing a mic. Well, not a mic, but a tattoo that's on LL Cool J's arm. It's a tattoo of a mic. Now, they had a conversation about this, but anyway, LL Cool J had told him, like, hey, this tattoo, this mic, it represented, something sentimental to me, right? It took him around the world. It changed his life. They had a convo about this thing. And Cannabis had stated in his original verse of this song that he was going to be doing with LL Cool J, yo, L, is that a mic on your arm? Let me borrow that. Now, in hindsight, LL Cool J now admits, and I'm sure he probably should have known this anyway, that, Cannabis meant that in a respectful way. Probably didn't mean any harm. But at the time, though, not so much. Remember, I told you, rap is competitive. Guys are on the edge, ready to go. At the time, LL Cool J says to Cannabis, hey, can you change this verse? Cannabis says, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll change it. But however, after Cannabis changed the verse, LL Cool J would still record his own verse, taking shots at someone, Cannabis, on the same song. He says, the symbol on my arm is off limits to challengers. You hold the rusty sword. I swing the Excalibur. And the song comes out and it's featuring Redman, Method Man, DMX, and it has this new Cannabis verse and this LL verse, right? And we can all tell I was dissing somebody here. Somebody's getting dissed. The streets were suspicious. Now, it's a bit confusing because it's odd to hear someone being dissed, but you can't map out, was there another sub sent out to LL? But eventually rumors would swell up, right? And word gets around town. Cannabis original verse leaks. And people start putting two and two together. Everybody's able to piece this and understand what happened. Now, because of all this noise, both men eventually spoke on the phone, right? This was a recorded phone conversation, by the way. It's out there on the World Wide Web somewhere. And the resolution that both men said they would meet was that LL would give Cannabis a verse on another song or maybe work on a soundtrack for something like Any Given Sunday, which was a film that LL Cool J was doing at the time. But the embarrassment and noise must have been a bit too much for Cannabis, or maybe there was more lack of communication, because Cannabis would launch his attack with a song called Second Round KO. One of my favorite diss records of all time. I mean, you look at the video, Mike Tyson's in the video, Wyclef produced this, I believe. I mean, it was like, oh my God, there's a young MC shooting at rich and TV powerful, famous LL Cool J. And he's jabbing him really well. So LL Cool J, who's not one to duck competition, he responded with The Ripper Strikes Back, which I also think was another amazing diss record. Just off energy alone, LL was like, oh, young boy, you want it? Boom, bop. But anyway, there were a few more digs by both guys, but this battle led to no violence. I mean, LL Cool J even ended up thanking Cannabis on the album notes of his album for inspiration. So that should tell you everything you need to know. Another example of a battle that didn't lead to beef, it's from back in the days. I'm going to take you guys even further back. Something called the Bridge Wars. Now, this one was also fun because it was an argument about the birthplace of hip hop, right? It involved a debate about that. And it involved MCs yet again not taking too kind to being slighted. Long story short, Marley Marl's Juice Crew, remember Marley Marl? Yeah. He had an all-star cast, right, in that Juice Crew of Queensbridge MCs or adjacent MCs, right? MC Shan, Big Daddy Kane, Biz Markie, Roxanne Shante, Master Ace, you get the point, right? And they made a song called The Bridge. Now, this track was produced by Marley Marl and performed by MC Shan, right? And another MC, young again, right? KRS-One from BDP, aka Boogie Down Productions. He took offense to something he didn't like that MC Shan said. And he believed that MC Shan was implying that hip hop started in Queens. Now, mind you, remember I told you about New York is competitive. This is one city, by the way. We're arguing about, well, was hip hop created in New York? Yes, but where in New York? Your part of New York or my part of New York? Right? This is one city. I remember I told you it's so big, yet it's so small, right? And here they are arguing. Now, MC Shan, he denies this. He says, come on, everybody knows, the genre started in the Bronx, where KRS-One is from, right? But KRS didn't care. He ended up making a song called South Bronx. And this song from this young MC had the streets talking, right? Now, MC Shan didn't back down. He responded with Kill That Noise. And he even says again, he denies saying that rap started in Queensbridge. He says, what's wrong with this young guy, right? And he pretty much accuses KRS-One of something that you guys do right now. You say someone is cloud chasing. Yeah, I think KRS was cloud chasing. But anyway, KRS and BDP responded with The Bridge Is Over. You might know that song, right? And the riff continues. Now, while I do want to mention around the same time, a member from BDP, Scott LaRock, was unfortunately murdered. Now, his murder had nothing to do with this riff. There was a separate issue that he was trying to mediate somewhere else. It had nothing to do with this. But eventually, though, KRS-One and Marley Marl would piece things up until decades later when both men were older and MC Shan wanted to rehash things under the guise that he didn't get to battle KRS-One, whatever that meant. But KRS-One did respond back, but both guys are OGs at this point, so let's move on. Ironically, KRS-One was also involved in another battle with Nelly, of all people, right? I'm not going to bore you much with this one. I'm just going to tell you that KRS-One said certain people were not real hip-hop. He wrote a song called Clear 'Em Out, which attacked the top rappers on the charts, who he referred to as pop rap. Now, Nelly, a chart topper at the time, took offense to this and responded on Wax with the Rock the Mic remix. KRS responded as well, again, with Over Here. And he does claim that he wasn't singling out Nelly, but this is just how hip-hop competition and battling goes, right? Whether you're a commercial Southern MC or a veteran New York MC, people are always on go mode. Now, another battle that I want to point out is Joyner Lucas versus Tory Lanez. I think this is a good new age example of a battle that wasn't beef, right? I think you guys would agree. Joyner Lucas even says now, as he's battling Skepta, that Tory's his guy now, right? This all started from this competitive spirit, right? With Tory saying he's better than many MCs and Joyner Lucas pushing back. They traded records. There was no violence. I really, really like this battle. Even though a lot of you guys say Tory won, I think hip hop won for that battle. This was a win for both MCs, in my opinion. And they even ended up collaborating on a record. They ended up on the same tour. These guys ended up being okay, man. Right? Okay. I got another one. Common versus Ice Cube. Now, this one's a bit tricky, but it'll allow us to test the limits of battling with no beef. Now, I wouldn't mind if you guys say this is almost beef. This is almost beef. I mean, Minister Farrakhan got involved, right? Let me kind of break this down, okay? So, No ID was in the Nation of Islam, and Ice Cube was in the Nation of Islam. So there was some relationship there. Minister Farrakhan, No ID was a common, collaborator, right? So No ID and Common had a relationship. It all makes sense. So that's why Farrakhan got involved. But anyway, Ice Cube already had a reputation of, he's got one of the darkest diss records and no Vaseline, right? So he already had a reputation of being a bit, dare I say, right? And then you got a guy like Common who had a reputation of having a clique behind him, but people also looked at him as more of a conscious rapper, right? Or more of that Chicago chill rapper. Now, this though did start because of hip hop, quite literally, right? In a song from Common called "I Used to Love Her," Common partially blamed hip hop's change from pro-black music to this street music, street culture, gangster music on the West Coast. He somewhat does that, right? And in particular, I want to point out the line where he says, you know, I wasn't salty, she was with the boys in the hood. Now, if you remember, the film, The Boys in the Hood, was located where? It was set in South Central Los Angeles. So I could see why West Coast guys, especially Ice Cube, would take offense to that. So Ice Cube shoots back on a Mac 10 song called West Side Slaughterhouse, right? Now, the thing is, the story goes, Common ignored it at first, but then he saw another visual of Ice Cube, Mac 10, and Dub C on BT dissing him. So Common responds back with one of a lot of people's favorite diss records in The Bitch in You, right? Now, Ice Cube would swing back with another song called Who Bangin', going back at Common. So you kind of get the gist, right? You kind of get the gist. Eventually, before things can escalate, both men were able to meet up, thanks to Mr. Farrakhan, letting it go, piecing it up. It did not result in beef. Okay, guys, consider this like a type of director's cut, right? I'm doing some editing here, and I realized that I undersold some things, right? The first one is Ice Cube No Vaseline record. Now, part of why I did that is because I presume some of you have seen Straight Outta Compton. And before I move on to the beef portion of this whole doc, I want to revisit that No Vaseline record, NWA as a whole, and not do a disservice also to the West Coast. So I told you guys No Vaseline is one of the darkest diss records of all time. Well, why did that happen? Ice Cube was in a group called NWA, okay? So if you haven't seen the movie, this is a short little spark notes. And Ice Cube felt as though he was getting cheated, in that group. And part of the leader of that group was Eazy-E. So, he left the group. Eazy-E and the rest of NWA took some shots at Ice Cube on upcoming projects, and then Ice Cube eventually did release No Vaseline, really attacking them, and Jerry Heller, who was sort of the manager of NWA, right? Him and Eazy-E were allegedly, the two that made sure that the rest were being taken advantage of. Soon later, Dr. Dre, who you now know as the Dr. Dre, leaves NWA, citing some of the same reasons, right? Not getting paid, things like that, or the money not making sense. And then, Dr. Dre links up with Suge Knight. He has Snoop Dogg around him. They take some shots at Eazy-E. Eazy-E also releases Real Mother F&Gs, one of my actual favorite diss records of all time. Now, you might be asking, where do we categorize all of this? This, to me, should have been in the beef portion. I don't really mention it, I believe, in the next part, but it's important. It's important in West Coast history. It's important in music business, right? So that's one. I just had to put this in here. I couldn't skip this, right? The next part that I couldn't skip, I don't want to disrespect the East Coast, and a good example of competitive battling and also kind of like tethering that line is between Jadakiss of D Block, The Lox, as you might know them, and Beanie Siegel of the Rockefeller camp, one of Jay-Z's sort of, I call Bleak the right-hand man. Beanie would be, I guess, the underboss, right? So the idea is that Jadakiss had took some offense to Jay-Z sort of stepping on his R&B features, right? That was kind of the story out there. Jada would do these features of R&B, and Jay-Z would step on it by releasing, some remixes and things like that, or undercutting and doing the features instead, whatever the case might be. So this is an interesting case of, also it was kind of competitive. Like Beanie Siegel is from Philly, Jay-Z's from New York, Jada is from New York. But Jada had also alluded to some of the Philly cats sort of, jacking his style. So anyway, Beanie Sigel takes up for Jay-Z here. Maybe, a strategic move to make Jada seem like a lesser guy, right? Like, you're not popular enough to battle Jay-Z. I would beg to disagree. But Beanie, steps up here, and then it begins. And I argue that this remained mostly competitive, but when I walk you through it, you may say, nah, not really. So freestyles are starting. Remember I told you about the early 2000s. This is how, things sort of goes, right? People are freestyling, throwing subs. I'm going to pinpoint certain moments here. Jada, DMX have a record called where here we go again. And basically, Jada takes shots there, and also DMX apparently taking some subs at Jay-Z. So that really kind of escalate things here. You got that Lox Rough Rider connection, right? And you got the Jay-Z Beanie Sigel connection. So it gets really competitive. This is an exciting time for hip hop fans. And the notable records other than is Beanie Sigel has a freestyle over Jada Kiss's famous Put Your Hands Up beat. And the idea is they're witty lines like, I'm about to sun kiss like a soda. And then Jada responds over his own freestyle on another instrumental where, he says, I hate beans, but F it, Kiss gon' eat. Now, there is, and when I say it was competitive and there was a little bit of, might have been almost beef because these are two rigid East Coast groups. There was a concert that Jada was in, and Jada performs at that concert, kind of calls out Sigel, and then Sigel, who wasn't even supposed to be there, happened to be in the area, shows up, gets invited on stage by Diddy, who's supposed to really be, close with the Lox, and, they have their relationship. Remember, that gets convoluted. But anyway, there's a little confrontation there, saying people's names, that goes along. But eventually, there's the key part of the story, and why I had to include it here as a director's cut, is the story goes, Jada Kiss and Beanie Sigel actually met at the airport one day and talked while, during the midst of this whole competitive battling, right? And, while Styles and Jada has said some lines that kind of is like stuff alluding to Aaliyah, and Beanie has said some stuff, they kind of almost in a way pieced it up and then asked each other like, yo, it's kind of fun for hip hop, right? Do you want to keep it going? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they keep it going in their own way of taking subs and stuff like that. But eventually everyone, notices they pieced it up, and they eventually do actually piece it up and do songs together, right? So I just think this is a piece that if I didn't add this to the doc, I wouldn't feel right about it. So anyway, let's move on to the next portion. Okay, so you can compete and battle without hate, but I think we can all agree you can't beef without hate or some sort of strong dislike. I asked you earlier in a question that I posed, and I said, what's beef? I present that same question to one Aubrey Drake Graham, a man who has been involved in many conflicts with multiple individuals in the music industry. Now, you're probably wondering if we're in the beef section. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, we are. And in this section, we'll discuss beef in hip hop. Real beef. Remember, there's a difference. We'll use this section to psychoanalyze Drake and his role in the great rap Shinobi Wars. As established earlier, beef can arise from competition that eventually moves to battling, and then what we have now between Drake and Kendrick Lamar, which to me is beef. Now, don't let the new age era of the commercialization of rap fool you. These guys are beefing. They hate each other. They don't like each other. Even after the diss record stopped, I am under the belief these gentlemen didn't call for peace. It was more like an armistice. I've done a video on this before comparing Drake and Kendrick Lamar to North Korea and South Korea. How they're just kind of in the longest armistice ever in hip hop. But at any point, you just need one missile. But anyway, so what was the key factor that pushed their conflict to beef? To me, it's pretty simple. It's something we talked about earlier. Remember when we referenced Jay and Nas, right? The involvement of family members, which I believe one man is responsible for. That one man is Drake, who used the allegations of domestic violence and paternity doubts to muddy up things on his record, Family Matters. So once we get the involvement of family, we see an escalation from Kendrick Lamar on records like Meet the Grams, remember that dark diss record, and Not Like Us, which alleges one of the worst things you can put on somebody, and that is that they're a certified pedophile. I mean, let's get one thing clear though, from Control till about Euphoria, for that 12 years, we were at competition and battling. That's right. But from Family Matters all the way to the last diss record released, Hard Part 6, that was beef. Right now, it's still beef, right? The only saving grace was that there was no violence from either side. I do want to mention that there was an incident at Drake's home that we only know to be about Toronto issues. This occurred during the time Drake was under lyrical attack, so it does speak to the heat around this time, right? But there's no evidence that this is connected to Kendrick Lamar. In fact, that has to do more with internal Toronto rifts. Some people mention people like The Weeknd, his manager Cash, and the XO team, but I'm not going to get too involved and deep that anymore, right? Now, the recent lawsuit from Drake against UMG, the parent company that houses both Kendrick Lamar and Drake, confirmed that this was also indeed beef, right? So what do I mean by that? Remember I told you there has to be consequences, right? So if we assume that the violent incident at Drake's house had nothing to do with Kendrick and Drake, we can assume that Drake escalating things to a lawsuit, to something so serious, hiring lawyers to sue UMG, even though it's not suing Kendrick Lamar directly, means there was a lot at stake. This is now beef. We're in a new era, you know? That's kind of what I'm trying to say here. The consequences are more about the bottom dollar more than ever, right? The human body and mind is always going to value two things. Remember, your safety, your income, right? So if your safety, physical, body, mind, and soul is fine, but your income is threatened, yeah. And we weren't going to get violence anyway. Both these men are too rich, too powerful, too influential to end up like Pac and Biggie, in my opinion, in this era, right? They both could move around and go anywhere like they're the president of that country or that town, or you get my point, right? The consequences becomes more about bottom line and reputation, which Drake now contends was armed. Now, we'll talk more about Drake's legal case in a bit, but let's truly deep dive on how we got here. I contend that there are two pieces to the story, right? The behind the scenes stuff, which we know so little about and can only speculate on, and the other pieces, which are things that we hear on tracks before the Great Rap Shinobi Wars and even after the Great Rap Shinobi Wars. And brother, sister, there were a lot of tracks. Not just the battle. I mean, beforehand, I counted 32 songs with subliminals up until Like That. And as a matter of fact, there are so many creators, shout out to them, who have documented all of these subliminals. I think I'm still finding subliminals. I mean, you take a record like Over Here with Party Next Door and Drake, and I'm thinking about what Drake said, oh yeah, this ain't Compton, it ain't no fairy tale neither. And I'm like, brother, was that a sub? Now I've got to connect the timing, but you get the points, all right? Go look it up. There were a lot of subliminals between both guys, right? And that's just the ones that I can catch, other creators can catch. I'm sure you'll be listening to another record 3 to 4 years from now and go, oh my God, I didn't know he said that and was dissing Kendrick. I didn't know he said that and was dissing Drake. Now, I'm going to try my best to somewhat move the behind the scenes stuff aside a bit, right? You understand where I'm going with this? And we'll work with it, but we'll also work with what we have, which is the records, right? So the war officially launches because of Like That, right? We get Like That because of first person shooter. Now, when you consider the subliminals between Drake and Kendrick, I could see how Drake going to grab J. Cole for a track, and on that track, J. Cole is proclaiming there's a big three and he's the best. Remember what I said earlier? I could see how that would infuriate the Pitbull. It would infuriate the Pitbull that is Kendrick Lamar. And remember, on the same record, Drake's kind of excluding Kendrick, right? Again, reminds you of a bit of what we talked about with Jodeci's Back, the freestyle. Now, the story does go that Kendrick was asked to be on this track and he declined, as he and Drake had unresolved issues. Now, I want to say something. I hate to be the I can see both sides guy here, but I can really see both sides. I could see you saying, hey, HQ, Drake asked Kendrick to participate in what would have made hip hop history. And he didn't want to play ball and he didn't want to participate in this together camaraderie thing. He was being selfish. He wants to crown himself. I could see that. And I could see other people saying, but why would Kendrick do that? Why would he want to do the kumbaya thing when we've been taking shots? There's been no resolution. I still think you understand what I'm saying? I can see that. Now, I know I said we should ignore the behind the scenes a little bit and work with what we have, but I got another tinfoil hat theory for you, right? And I made another video on this as well, and I just think it's not a coincidence to me that this first-person shooter record is saying big as the Super Bowl, but then Kendrick gets the Super Bowl a little bit later, right? The way I see it, could it be possible that Kendrick was in talks about the Super Bowl? Word spreads around. It's a very small business, right? Small industry, right? And Drake may or may not have had this record ready, thinking it would be a fitting moment for the big three, right? And if I can get both of them on there, we can do it at the Super Bowl together. It's a good idea. I love the music more than beef. I just want to do this musical idea, right? Because you got to remember, though, I don't think Drake would have been jealous or wanted to sabotage Kendrick's Super Bowl performance in any way. No, because the idea is Drake has also declined the Super Bowl before. But he probably thought, this would make for a great moment. And some of you may argue, no, HQ, he probably wanted to step on Kendrick's moment based on your tinfoil hat theory. Okay, let's move on. So either way, we've established that Kendrick the Pitbull, he doesn't need a lot to be unleashed. He needs little reasons to become agitated and say people's names. And unleashed he now was, right? Now, what's interesting about Kendrick's timing was when he decided to launch his attack, Drake was on tour, right? He was wrapping up his tour and he had speculated that he was going to take a break. And I just want to point out, as a rap corner man, like if this was boxing and I was your corner man in rap, I would say it's a brilliant move by Kendrick, right? For Drake, hindsight is 20/20, but brother, it might have been a terrible mistake responding at that time. You probably could have responded at a little more convenient time. Some of you may say, well, HQ, they would have made fun of him. Do you want to win? Do you want to win your battles? Or do you care about what everyone is saying about you? That part about time is going to be important a little later. Let's keep going. Okay, so Drake wrapped up his tour in April of 2024. A record titled Push-Ups was leaked, right? Now, this record did wake the streets up and the nets up, and it had us wondering, like, oh, what's going on here? This is a leak? Is this Drake? Is this really the response to Like That? I mean, people speculated that the track was AI at first due to the nature of this release, but eventually we all realized it was real. It was Drake. And, not one to run away from competition and battle, to his credit, he quickly addressed Kendrick Lamar and things that he was saying on Like That. But he also addressed a few other MCs that teamed up to take him out. some of you dubbed this a 20v1. It wasn't 20, but it was close, right? With Future aligning with the likes of Rick Ross, A$AP Rocky, The Weeknd, and Metro Boomin to send shots at Drake. So if Drake isn't one to run away from competition and battle, what does he get right or wrong about beef? Now, I do want to point out Rick Ross, that was a bit complicated. It's got a cease and desist, French Montana. Drake unfollowed him, but he was involved in ways, right? Anyway, let's move on. So the thing is, what does Drake get right or wrong about beef? Like Drake, he has a knack of doing something. This is not a new theory by me. It's a well-known thing in the hip hop space, which is lately Drake likes involving your romantic partner during a battle. Now, he's not the first MC to do this. This is pretty common in certain, battles. You see someone like Pac on Hit 'Em Up. Come on, first up, right? So you see that. It's not new. But it happens, right? Now, the thing is, outside of Drake, I've said to you guys that involving people's families or loved ones can quickly move competition and battles to beef. I mean, very quickly. Like I said, make no mistake, he's not the first to do this. Many MCs have made claims of sleeping with people's wives, etc. But I have noticed he's made this a reoccurring theme. The odd thing about it is if you look at Drake's battle history before becoming, Drake, like as a young MC in Canada, this wasn't always his go-to move. Like from what I remember, Drake battled another Toronto MC on WHATS. His name was Aristo. And that beef was one which, in my opinion, Drake won without dabbling much into the personal of wives or fiancés and children, right? This is another battle that Drake won without involving people's loved ones. And there's another battle which he did win by involving people's loved ones, which was Meek Mill. But looking back on it now, it's either Meek wasn't on his A game or Drake maneuvered masterfully, or both. See, because when you look at the Meek Mill and Drake battle, I'm struggling with how you have information about a rapper who's contending for GOAT status using writers. I'm struggling with how this rapper got peed on. You have all this information, but you still lose. So what was the key to Drake winning that battle and not losing the general public while involving someone else's spouse and family? And I have a theory. See, the key is that Drake, although he brought up Nicki Minaj, then Meek Mill's girlfriend, he brought her up in a more positive light. Right? He used her success and status to sort of play her up and play Meek Mill down as second class in his relationship. Now, this was probably an easy thing for Drake to do because he had a relationship with Nicki Minaj. They are both YMCMB members, right? They came up together. And Drake just quite literally played that masterfully, right? I mean, he dropped Charge Up to test the waters, waited to see if Meek would respond, and then he doubled up with back-to-back, an up-tempo, almost club-like record that took over the nets. And by the time Meek would respond with a subpar track in Wanna Know and then followed up with another track that was worth our time in War Pain, it was too late, right? And so it's safe to say Drake won that battle. But this really began, in my opinion, the showing of the chinks in Drake's armor, right? This to me stayed a battle though, because although Drake did end up talking about Meek Mill's girl, as I said, it was light and it ended up being respectful, right? Now, both men would eventually make up at about circa 2018 or so, and they even made a song together that was a heater. It was called Going Bad. So Drake does know what competition is, right? He knows what a battle is. But like I said, does he know what beef is? I don't know. And I think that's his answer too. Maybe he doesn't know. When I see the 2 L's that he's taken, one against Pusha T and another one against Kendrick Lamar, Drake has put himself in positions where these issues can escalate a bit more than they have to. And even though he fared better against a Common or Meek Mill, he keeps wanting to go this other way, right? Now, maybe it's because the women involved were Common and Meek Mill, he knew him in a different way. I just can't figure out why he's more prone to going personal nowadays, right? On Family Matters, Drake says he's losing perspective on beef. Now, obviously, he probably said that for his own reasons, but I think it applies in the conversation that we're having right now. Now, before I deep dive on his involvement in, bringing up families in the battle against Kendrick Lamar, I want to trace back to the allegations from both Kendrick Lamar and Pusha T that Drake was putting money in the streets for information on them. Now, while I don't think this is the worst crime, learning from the likes of people like 50 Cent, I could see how once you look like you want to get your hands dirty like that, it can make someone like Kendrick Lamar, it can make someone like Pusha T be on high alert, right? You get what I'm saying? So the question is, did these battles even warrant looking for dirt? Pusha T's beef with Drake is kind of odd to me, right? It connects to a business issue between Birdman, Pharrell, and Clips. So I can kind of excuse maybe looking for dirt on Pusha T. And as you can see, Pusha T ended up having his own dirt on Drake, right? Whether through Kanye or through Indeed with a girl that was sleeping with 40. Rather than going at this angle of looking for dirt and mentioning Pusha T's fiance on a record, we could have probably just went at it from a battle only perspective, right? But instead, Drake takes this angle on Duppy, mentioning Virginia Williams and also looking for dirt. And the thing is, if you're going to go in that angle and make it beef, you kind of have to stand on it as a bad guy, like 50 Cent, or as the bad guy, like 50 Cent or Tupac, right? But for some reason, the reality is in both beefs that Drake has lost, for both men, the mention of their wives and kids is a no-no for them. There was no coming back, right? On Duppy, when Drake says, keep playing with me and I'll make it ring on you like Virginia Williams, a pun on Pusha T's fiance at the time, Virginia Williams. And then he says on Push-Ups, I'll be with them bodyguards like Whitney, referencing a Whitney Houston movie that has Kevin Costner in it, but also in a sly way referencing Kendrick Lamar's fiance, Whitney Alford. And you're alluding to angles here. And by the time you allude to angles, these guys, they start thinking, oh, where do you want to take this? And see, Kendrick Lamar at least was patient with it. Unlike Kendrick Lamar, Pusha T didn't warn Drake. He immediately went with the story of Adidon and shaking things up. Kendrick Lamar did warn Drake. And in my opinion, he warned them multiple times, right? He used multiple lines in a battle to advise Drake that he wanted this to stay in a competition and battle realm, right? That this did not indeed need to become beef. Okay, so where are we? Like that drops, we get push-ups. Right? And if Drake has an issue with the chain and tattoos line, like academics had alleged, all right, I guess the Whitney line is fair game in terms of gauging the waters and whether or not this is beef. So then we get TaylorMade, which uses an AI voice of a deceased Tupac. And a lot of people say that comes off as tone deaf and upsets the culture. It's still a solid, good attempt at baiting Kendrick and hitting him where it hurts because Kendrick idolizes Tupac. I do have to wonder, though, now that I think about TaylorMade, Drake saying, talk about him liking young girls. It's probably true that's, I heard it on the Joe Budden podcast. It's probably true. Yeah, brother, that's, I wonder if that was a good decision. But anyway, Euphoria drops. And then this, along with the next record, 616 in LA, have aged really well for me. Because Euphoria is laced with what I call body shots. Not necessarily, knockouts, but good attempts by Kendrick Lamar to poke at Drake's weaknesses and fault him from many angles, right? Part of this track are true, some are far-fetched. There's some reaches, but it's good. It has body shots. It sounds good. It has a lot of, call and responses and things like, what is it, the braids? It works, right? Some, even point to things like Kendrick mocking Drake for not knowing anything about what it's like to be a dad. I don't think that's a reason for escalation. But, in Euphoria, Kendrick does also take time to let Drake know that if he speaks on his family, things would escalate. Things would move to another realm. Now, this is the pivotal moment of Kendrick saying, hey, dog, I'm setting the lines. I'm setting the limits. Anything outside of what we're doing right here is going to be beef. Now, I believe as I'm doing this piece, this is why Euphoria is aged really well for me, right? The fact is, as much as I had criticisms, for Kendrick being overly competitive and thirsty for battle, his responses in Euphoria and things like 616 in LA shows that he understands all of that and beef. You get what I'm saying? Like, interesting enough, before Drake could respond to Euphoria, when Kendrick releases that 616 in LA record, it's this weird combination of prayer and getting permission from God to go to war, and also a message to Drake, and an appeal to understand that this is not where it should go. And he's also kind of appealing to the audience to understand that he's only going to do this if this guy takes it there. I mean, it's pretty laced, it's pretty deep, right? I like the record. It's really aged really well for me. Some even said there was a point there where they say, oh, he might have been speaking in the beginning from Drake's perspective, so Drake could understand this message was specifically for him, right? You understand what I'm saying? And it goes back to what he said on Euphoria. If you take it there, I'm taking it further. Now, Kendrick also does some other smart things on that record. He starts talking about, academics being compromised, and maybe Drake would have a mole in his camp. So it's a really good balance of, hey, I'm warning you. Hey, to the audience, I really don't want it to go here. This guy might take it here. And if I take it further, please don't judge my character, right? But all of that didn't stop Drake, because eventually Drake would drop Family Matters and he would take it further. And I'm really shocked that this didn't make Drake pause at any point, especially the talks of people in OVO working for Kendrick, right? He drops Family Matters. And at the time, I perceived that this was his red button, right? I mean, it's a 7-minute long track that I'll admit to you, when I heard it, I figured, oh my God, Drake might have this in the bag. And for a few minutes, he did. He had 3 different beats. He addressed the extras that came at him during the 20v1. He rapped really, really well. Then he crooned. But then he got into the mudslinging, right? And he created doubt around Kendrick Lamar's name, talked about his family. And for about 30 minutes or so, a lot of us sat there and went, oh, wow, this is going to be a problem for Kendrick. But remember I told you Kendrick understands what beef is? Well, if not for the fact that both these guys are millionaires that can't reach each other due to security, when I heard what Kendrick Lamar would do next, which was released 30 minutes after Family Matters, a record called Meet the Grams, that sounded like a man who wanted violence. That sounded like a man who understood what real beef was. Now, Meet the Grams is my least listened to song out of the beef. Yes, even less than Hard Part 6. It's not because it sucks or it's bad or I don't understand how important it is. It's because it's dark. And quite frankly, it makes me uncomfortable. And I've heard many diss records in my life. It flips the whole family angle, right? Like from Family Matters, right? He addresses Drake's direct family, the Grahams, and also explicitly calls him a pedophile. For some, a bridge too far. But for me, as someone who knows that there's a difference between competition, battling, and beef, I looked at it as proper escalation when you talk about a man's children, how they allegedly aren't his, and you allege that he's guilty of domestic violence. Right? Knowing what I now know, I mean, there were so many angles that Drake could have took or taken that wouldn't have turned this to beef. Right? I mean, he did some of these things, but I felt he was really fixated on this red button, right? Is that kid really Dave Freeze? Where I think there were other angles. I mean, you can call him a Compton Israelite. It's a joke that I've made all the time. It doesn't have to be true. It can be reaches, right? If those that know, right? And the fact that, you could rebuttal with Kendrick how you're black music royalty, so Kendrick can't attack your culture card. I mean, you could talk about Kendrick's hypocrisy, or in my case, I call it selective outrage with, not wanting to be the savior, but wearing a Jesus crown and then working with Kodak Black and saying you care about women's rights. I mean, there's a lot more that works. I mean, there's a lot of things said on Mr. Morale that you could use. And although Kendrick admits it, doesn't mean anything. You flip it on him, right? But you didn't do that. I mean, you jabbed it, you used it here and there, but you didn't go all the way into committing into these things that would have sounded like your euphoria, right? And one day we will talk about how Kendrick making Mr. Morale first did help him win this battle. Because while Drake could kind of shoot back with some things like, being obsessed with a white woman, the fact that Kendrick has said that on Mr. Morale, it kind of helps him. It's like, I've already 8 Mile myself, right? So you can't do it on me again. But anyway, here's the thing though. Meet the Grahams did not help Kendrick win a battle, but it was a crucial move. I should say it wasn't the reason Kendrick won the battle, but it was a crucial move to winning the battle. It sucked all the air out of the release of Family Matters, right? It changed the convo from dirt on Kendrick's name to dirt on Drake's name. And in my opinion, it started making this beef about timing, right? I mean, the idea is, remember I told you earlier when Jay-Z and Nas dissed each other, you waited months and etc. But things have changed in 2025. 2024, 2023, 2022, we can let the records go. Bump, bop, 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 bop. We can let the records go fast, quick. You understand what I'm saying? So for me, that pace, that change of pace by Kendrick Lamar dropping right after Family Matters signaled to me, I should say, right, that, Drake's got to do something. That's what it signaled to me. I remember thinking to myself, hey, Drake needs to get into the studio immediately. Things has changed. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because once you release your quote unquote red button, but a man can release a track 30 minutes after. Now, I didn't want to talk about a lot of things that people bring up, pre-recorded tracks, etc. I think both these gentlemen had skeletons of records ready to go. They were able to go back in there and rebuttal. I think Kendrick may have had more records prepped than Drake, because he does have rebuttals on some of his, on a record like Not Like Us, for example. But I think a lot of the body of the records were already ready to go for both gentlemen, right? Because this became a PR game. This became a timing game, right? I mean, Kendrick had a fictitious story about a daughter on Meet the Grahams, right? And that didn't help Kendrick win the PR game in the long run, but for a short time, it did. It made people start questioning, looking up, researching Drake's daughter, right? Now, I didn't necessarily feel like Meet the Grahams was a knockout punch. But shortly after, Kendrick Lamar would release the actual knockout punch, which was a record called Not Like Us. So remember I told you there's the daughter, people are researching whether the daughter's true or not. Well, who cares? There's a new record called Not Like Us out. It's a bop. It's got people dancing. It's got a West Coast sound to it. And I figured, okay, Kendrick did stay on Euphoria back to back. I like that record. He back to back twice. Back to back being a song that Drake had wrote, right? Remember? He back to back with Euphoria and LA 16, 616 in LA. Then he back to back with Meet the Grams and Not Like Us. But I was also thinking maybe that's a triple, right? You back to back by writing a hit song that was similar to back to back, even better. Oh yeah, this felt like a knockout punch. Now, I figured, okay, at this time, like it's a bop, but maybe Drake can still do something about this if it commits to the bit, right? Like if he runs into the studio and realizes, oh snap, this battle is gone to somewhere else. It's now beef. I need to be ready for anything. But however, I was wrong. Not Like Us immediately swarmed the nets. It swarmed the streets. It showed that Kendrick understood the entire Game of Thrones and Drake's sort of lack of understanding, right? Kendrick had masterfully walked the competition here. He walked the line of competition to battle to beef perfectly, right? And then I think also Kendrick was prepped with the records thinking to himself, I may never box this guy, but he may trigger another level of hatred in me, and I need to be ready with all these records that may display and show the audience that I really hate him if he wants to take it there. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you? So we're considering that Kendrick Lamar had his plan figured out. Drake, on the other hand, though, I don't know if he thought he could just punch one time really hard with Family Matters and win this whole thing, but he wasn't fully prepared because later on he would drop a record called The Hard Part 6, which at first I thought was okay. It was good. It was a nice way to settle the crowd. In fact, I'm not going to let people try to change my mind too much. I still contend that at least the very first half of The Hard Part 6 was pretty good. Now, my argument, though, is what would have helped him is if he was committed to the bit, didn't say that he was leaving the battle, and double up with another banger of his own. But like I said, Kendrick had a plan all the way to the end. He was committed to the bit all the way to the end. He was ready with multiple tracks, whereas I feel like Drake was resting on the laurels of being able to punch really hard with Family Matters. Now that I listen to it over and over, and I listen to all these beef records over and over, I still don't necessarily hate Hard Part 6 as much as the internet does. My bigger issues with it is that when you listen to the record over and over again, there is a sort of change in energy in Drake's voice. You can quite literally hear it, right? I mean, this is kind of my proof in the pudding, right? Like, how can you drag a competition and battle to a beef with a record like Family Matters and not think that it was going to have to go further than what you did? Why would you think that that would have really just ended the guy? I mean, no matter how good you thought Family Matters was, you had to think that you were saying something very sensitive about another person. So for you to make Hard Part 6, which again, I think half of it on the spot, you having to create that is pretty good, but the rest of it sounds like you're checking out the battle, right? Yeah, checking out the battle. It's a battle that you dragged into this realm. Because again, if I bring up somebody's fiance and children, other than expecting violence, the next thing I should expect is at least a barrage of audio tracks, right? But here's the out here though, is some claim that, you know, Drake immediately exited this battle due to him recognizing that there were nefarious activities going on in the background by the record companies. Okay. Now, you know that Drake would eventually get in a litigation with UMG, the record label, so some would use this as a way to back that claim, right? Now, if you know one thing about me and you've been following me in the commentary hip-hop space, you know that this is one of my few favorite things to discuss in hip-hop, which is this litigation. I do want to say something, though, before I do that about the Hard Part 6. Again, there are two things that I think have done more damage to the Hard Part 6 in the last few months. The animated videos. The animated videos, I think, have done more damage to the Hard Part 6. And then after that, I think the next thing that has done a lot of damage to Hard Part 6 is just time. Again, a lot of that stuff that wasn't great about the record, you could have hid by following up with another strong record. And with time, people wouldn't even think about the other stuff on the Hard Part 6. Same way people aren't thinking about the daughter on Meet the Grams, because Not Like Us comes up right after that. Okay, you get it? Okay. Oh, where were we? Yes, the next escalation after Hard Part 6, right? Now, this is not two men fighting each other. Yes, I do understand that he's not suing Kendrick Lamar, suing UMG, but that's kind of proving my point, right? Escalating things in the court of law. So why is this litigation a challenge for me? Well, while Kendrick is choosing to perform Not Like Us at the Super Bowl and is on a stadium tour, his way of letting everybody know it's up forever, Drake is choosing this kind of mixed angle today of speaking on the beef on record subliminally and how he won't let them slide, but also through his attorneys, as they're in litigation, trying to prove that Interscope, a company under UMG that was responsible for distributing Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us, were apparently pumping up Not Like Us to fit UMG's underlying interest of wanting Drake devalued and defamed. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Are you with me? Okay, cool. The conflict, though, for me lies in the fact that although I don't really care about the well-being of a billion-dollar corporation, screw UMG. I'm going to try my best not to do PR work for them, because record labels have predatory ways and they can't stand to not gain another dollar. I know and remember how we got here. That's always going to be my issue with the litigation, is I remember how we got here. As they say, the North remembers, right? There has to be some accountability from Drake's side. The willingness to get into a war that apparently he chose to willingly do while he was up for contract negotiation. And also engaging in that war and the escalation by him during that war. Remember, this is how this works, right? UMG is the big building. Okay, in that big building, there's two smaller buildings. There's Interscope, right, which is the Kendrick side. They push Kendrick's records. And then there's Republic, which is the Drake side. They push Drake's record, right? And I present this question. Who's to say if Family Matters was everything Drake thought it would be? Republic, the same company under UMG, wouldn't have pulled the same stunts being alleged here that Interscope pulled to make the record work. One thing I will say about billionaire predatory companies is that while they may not intentionally want to devalue you, I'm not saying that they're not, but one thing I know is they like money. They like money. That Not Like Us record comes out, they see the streets loving it, they say, okay, it's time to dump and put money in there. And Interscope, which is the building under UMG, they want to enrich their pockets. And they want to do, what's best for their building. And it seems like Drake is kind of asking the parent company, UMG, to have put a stop to that. But again, I present the same question. Would you have asked, for the same thing if your record Family Matters was the one defaming Kendrick Lamar, right? But all of these questions, along with others, are for a judge to ask and have answered, right? To have all the witnesses and parties involved, share some truths. And I'm hoping that we can get a resolution in that litigation. And I'll be one of the first ones to sit here and break it down, whether it goes Drake's way or it does not go Drake's way. Now, some people are asking, where does this leave, rap music today? And, how would the label adjust? For example, if the record companies lose this, if UMG loses this, as I've proven before and I said before, competition, battling, and beef is part of hip hop, right? The first two more than the latter. And I don't think competition and battling is going anywhere. The only result I could see if the record labels were to lose this case against Drake is they would probably remove themselves from the diss song process, meaning everybody would have to upload their joints to YouTube, get on SoundCloud, we'll still probably diss each other. Rap disses would become non-commercial, right? Non-commercial recordings that are not distributed or profited from by the label, which wouldn't be the worst thing on the planet, right? But, to point out, we also see people beefing and recording disses against each other who who have never been signed to a record label or have a deal or a partnership with a major company. So we don't need record labels to diss. This is not a new concept, right? Quite frankly, though, there are other situations in hip hop that are far darker than the beef that I just walked you through with Kendrick Lamar and Drake, right? Remember, we just talked about street beefs that weren't involving labels. Yeah, there are street beefs that start outside of the booth, then get into the booth. You understand what I'm saying? Street beef that starts with problems with individuals that lead to violence, and then people go rap about it, right? The saying that me and my friends have had for a while is, oh, that's some real street shit. We say that. It's a very simple saying. Whenever we see two people on records talking to each other, we go, oh, no, that's some real street shit. You understand what I'm saying? Or maybe when people on the internet attacking each other with words, we can just quite literally tell the difference that it's some street shit, right? It's almost like we know and we can tell, hey, this street shit didn't follow the competition to battle to beef pipeline. Just outright problems between individuals, and then the music is being the soundtrack for that. I personally don't feel comfortable deep diving on a lot of these type of issues. That's on the line of, you know, the Chicago street wars and things like that, and the drill days. So if you're interested, you know where you can find coverages on these type of issues. You know, wars in Chirac, New York drill, music, etc., right? But anyway, as I did earlier, I do want to close by reviewing an extensive list of beefs in hip hop that should be classified as such. And I also want to talk about whether or not they escalated, right? Like maybe they were battles that led to beef or street beefs that ended up on records, etc. A bit of a thing that I have noticed, though, in beef and hip hop is proximity, right? So I do think proximity can often dictate whether things can get uglier. Remember, I told you with Kendrick and Drake, both guys are millionaires. They're not close to each other in where they stay and things like that. It's not the same as two underground guys that live in the same city that take the same train to the studio. I think there's more of a chance for those type of things to get uglier. So I do want to point that out, right? It's very easy to see that somebody's saying something about you, you know, on a record, and you both are from Atlanta or you're both from the same West Coast. It's very easy to see how that could lead to real beef. And you'll notice that as I go through these, you know, recent beefs, you'll notice that a lot of these people, they're very close to each other in terms of location. There's close proximity to each other. You get what I'm saying? Okay, cool. Let's get into it. All right. One of the ones I want to point out to that some of you may not know is T.I. versus Ludacris. This is a beef, right? Now, this one is competition to battle to slight beef back to peace. Okay, so with T.I. wanting to be the king of the South, he clashed with a lot of MCs from the South who were in his way, right? I mean, Luda had claimed Ludacris. He had claimed he heard many subs that T.I. would often say on records. And things did get more competitive when they were to appear on the same song from another Southern MC named Young Buck. Young Buck had a record called Stomp, and T.I. dropped a line that was a play on Ludacris's name, where he says, "Me getting beat down, that's Ludacris." Apparently, you know, addressing any rumors of him getting beat down, that's Ludacris, as in it's a ludicrous thing to say, and nah, that would happen to Ludacris instead, not me. Luda did not take kindly to that, right? He would write and record a verse for the same song, by the way, that goes right back at T.I. And it's also a play on word on T.I.'s name, where he says, "Please stay off the T.I.P. of my dick." Now, Young Buck was placed in a tough spot here, right? He did some reshuffling, spoke to everybody involved. He decided to add Game, who was his G-Unit colleague at the time, to the record, and release one version without T.I.'s verse on the album. Now, similar to 4321, everybody eventually was able to hear T.I.'s verse. People were able to put two and two together. This Escalate thins. And if you actually search on the net, you will find a version of all the MCs I just named on that same song. Now, the problem with this is this could have stayed at competition. Somewhat harsh words, but it wasn't that bad, right? Me getting beat down, that's ludicrous. Stay off the TIP of my dick, that's basic stuff. But however, T.I. would run into Ludacris's manager and violence ensued. Both men, though, have since reconciled, but you get the pipeline, right? Competitive, who's the king of the South, blah, blah, blah. Ludacris is doing well. I take shots. We get on records taking shots. And then you beat up my manager, not good. T.I. would, again, clash with another Southern rapper. This time, Houston rapper Lil Flip, or some of you might know him, Mr. Game Over. This time, specifically about the title of King of the South, not even the concept, the title of King of the South. Lil Flip was a little offended by that, right? And this was also another battle back and forth between both guys that also led to physical altercation. Now, this eventually was resolved thanks to Jay Prince. Some of you might still know Jay Prince now as rap's favorite mob boss, who would find a way to broker peace between both guys. T.I. also had another issue with late rapper Shorty Low, this time over who could be the king of Bankhead. T.I., what's your obsession with being a king, brother? He has an album. T.I.'s whole branding is about being a king. But anyway, yeah, records are traded back and forth between both guys. This led to a physical altercation, but eventually was pieced up. Now, as we keep going, I want to stay in the South with another issue between Young Jeezy and Gucci Mane. And this one is a lot. Now, I'm probably not going to do this beef any justice by chronicling it as somewhat of a footnote. I think it probably deserves its whole own documentary. But I have to mention it because it involved the aspect of collaboration, competition, then battling, and then violence. So let's talk about what happened. Jeezy and Gucci Mane had first did a collaboration. So their first collaboration, and Jeezy was under the impression that this collab would end up on his album, Let's Get It, Thug Motivation 101. Instead, Gucci had used it for his first independent album, Trap House. Okay, this was a record called Icy or So Icy. So later, Jeezy would then say he was never paid for the project. He was never paid for his guest verse, which Gucci had used for the independent album. Now, this record did pretty okay. It peaked at, I believe, somewhere at 40s in the 40s on a R&B hip hop chart, but it was one of those records that was bumping in the streets in the South. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, both guys start trading records. You got records like Stay Strapped, Round One, you know, and the words start escalating. Now, one day, the story goes, Gucci was visiting a female friend, and then apparently 4 men had broken into the house of that friend, assaulted him, threatened to take him out. Gucci grabbed his own weapon, and eventually one thing leads to another. His weapon was fired, hit one man, and then everybody fled the scene. The man that was hit was a rapper named Pookie Loke, who is one of Jeezy's partners, right? He was found deceased. Days later, Gucci turned himself to the police as a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was charged with the murder of that gentleman, Pookie Loke. Now, Gucci was acquitted, okay? And then there's silence, okay? Gucci drops again, releases a mixtape, though, with DJ Drama, who used to be, or was at the time, a previous Jeezy collaborator, okay? So now you see how fast, you see where this went, you see how you see where we're getting with this. Okay, now the thing is, Jeezy and his clique CTE, right? They get into an altercation with DJ Drama because the idea is, hey dog, Drama, me and you used to work together. Why would you go do that tape with Jeezy? So now they're trading records again, right? But then there's a truce again. But that one didn't last long, right? Now you get interviews from both guys. We're getting diss records again. Both men are saying they don't respect each other. But eventually, Gucci goes to jail, all right? Gucci goes to jail, and some of you know, he comes out a different man. He's different with everything except for Young Jeezy. This is beef. He's different with everything except Young Jeezy. I mean, this hate ran deep. Now, also, Jeezy's changing his life at this point, but somehow, some way, as we know that both guys still don't rock with each other, they agreed to do a versus. If you don't know what versus is, it's this, back and forth between two individuals playing both of their records versus each other to see who can get the crowd going some more. Started to get heated during the pandemic. You get the point. You know what a versus is. But anyway, they both agreed to do this versus battle in person. Why would you agree to this? But okay, Jeezy's changing his life. He's becoming more mature. Gucci's out of jail, becoming more mature. So I'm thinking this is a sign that things were cooler, right? Like this is over. But if you watch that versus battle, the way Gucci still felt comfortable invoking Jeezy's deceased friend, I mean, you think about the promo before the battle and, listen to the songs from Gucci after the battle, it's like, oh yeah, this is still up and it's forever. The only thing I think keeping this at bay is that Jeezy, who says he's in a different space in his life, he has a bit of maturity that won't let this thing keep going. But you know who's gonna have things going forever? Who's gonna keep things going forever? 50 Cent and Ja Rule. That's another beef that I want to talk about, right? You want to talk about a beef that kind of, it just goes in cycles every time between the two. Competition, battle, beef, competition, battle, beef. I hate you forever. It's these two. I mean, they want to play with each other, and that's the only time I think that's the only time I think I've ever heard of both of them being, in a room together or in the same space together, and it didn't turn into something, right? Nobody wants to end up on the no-fly list, so, right? So okay, whatever. But anyway, what's the story with 50 Cent and Ja Rule? The idea is that the problem started from an odd issue in the streets. Right? It was an odd situation in the streets that led to 50 aggressively baiting Ja Rule, right? To Ja Rule clapping back, pun intended, and then competing on records, battling, competing on the charts, and then kind of leading to, 50 Cent taking over in his career, becoming a lot more relevant. So let's talk about it. How does this start? Odd things in the street. So allegedly, the story is 50 Cent claims a friend of his had robbed Ja Rule for his chain, right? Now, Ja Rule does confirm the robbery, but he disputes that 50 Cent was involved. Ja Rule talks about 50 in a very, and I think this was his downfall, in a very dismissive way he used to. Now he has to address them. But anyway, he also claims, though, that 50 Cent it was more disrespected because he wasn't able to be in a music video and there was other stuff. But one thing I want to point out, I think this part is important. While I don't feel comfortable talking about street stuff, I do want to say that Ja Rule's record label, Murder Inc., thanks to federal investigations, we now know was being funded or at least largely involved with a Queens kingpin, Supreme. Kenneth Supreme McGriff, right? And the idea is that guy also was not fond of 50 Cent. And the idea is they also had other issues. So I think this adds to the animosity, right? Remember 50 Cent was shot 9 times. Do a little research on that. You'll kind of see where I'm going with this. But anyway, with all of this going on and 50 feeling like Ja Rule just doesn't like him after his friend robbed him, he feels the energy is wrong. He feels, he's getting snubbed by Ja Rule, and because they all from Queens. 50 Cent starts. He starts taking shots. Life's on the line, right? You hear records like Wankster, which was more popular, and then he takes shots on the Get Rich or Die Trying, where he's dissing Ja Rule with the comedian. You get it. 50 is on go mode, and when 50 is on go mode, 50 does not stop. Right now, the thing about this is, other people that 50 Cent was aligned with get involved with this. Dr. Dre, Eminem, D12, G Unit, right? They're all dissing Ja Rule. And remember when I said Ja Rule he did not take 50 Cent very seriously, and he took far too long to address the threat that 50 Cent was? Well, I think a lot of damage A lot of damage was done by 50 Cent before someone like Ja Rule took it seriously and decided to release, his records like Clapback E2C. There was a physical altercation between the two gentlemen, which led to 50 Cent being stabbed at a brawl in an Atlanta nightclub. I believe there were other incidents. And there were also things like people talking about orders of protections. I will say that the more I looked into that, the murdering team wants to kind of put that out as 50 acts of the order of protection. I believe after a certain incident, the police did that without 50 Cent's approval. There was just something that they filed for, people on the murdering team to stay away from 50 Cent. Now, 50 Cent, his history with beef is lengthy, buddy. Right? Now, as his career would soar and Ja Rule's will come back a little bit, mostly due to the federal investigation against his record label Murder Inc., which will slow his career down, 50 Cent on this new upward momentum career arc had issues with a lot of people that I'm not going to chronicle individually because we would be here for another hour. But I would say there is a bit of a difference in how 50 Cent and Ja Rule beefed, which involves some violence, versus how, let's say, he competed or battled with a Jadakiss, right? Or maybe even a Fat Joe. But then also the issues with Game, now that's real beef, right? I mean, let's kind of just chronicle them a little bit and show you the separation. So we say 50 Cent beef with Ja Rule, right? But after seeing Jada and Fat Joe standing next to Ja Rule on the song New York, 50 launched an attack on both gentlemen on wax, right? Here's what happened. Game pushes back and says he has no problem with Jadakiss and Fat Joe. So although he's a member of G Unit, he was not going to get involved in that. And 50, being a military-like leader, was not fond of that, didn't take kindly to that, and kicked Game out of G Unit. You with me? So Game is out of G Unit. Now, a war begins on multiple fronts, right? So the Jadakiss Locks camp, they're dissing 50 Cent now, right? And although this never leads to violence, this is so weird. I feel like the Locks and Jadakiss, in my opinion, took it too far. They took it to where I would have considered beef. But for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe 50 Cent has so much respect for these guys, or they just grew up in understanding the same code of conduct. 50 Cent actually went to Yonkers and pieced it up. Right? They said some vile stuff invoking 50 Cent's deceased mother on a remix of a record called Miss Jackson. Remember the Outkast song? In which they were talking to 50 Cent's deceased mother. Right? Now, 50 Cent's not a punk. He's not soft. So I guess maybe he just got over this. But you get the point. So Ja Rule beef, Game beef, because there was a shooting outside of Hot 97. Everybody's getting dissed, right? But Jadakiss and the Locks, not beef, just battling. Could have been beef because they talked about your mama, but you didn't let it go there. Now, 50 Cent and Fat Joe, I think could have got a lot heated. I think this is beef. I believe there was an opportunity in an altercation. And it's something that could have got a lot worse, in my opinion, because both guys apparently are known to kind of be hotheads. But eventually, they pieced it up. So you had a competition and award show, but eventually they pieced it up. Okay, so you see what I'm saying? 50 Cent had an extensive history of the competition to battle to beef aspects. Now, speaking of shots, though, what if I told you a Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown issue also led to Entourage clashing and shooting at each other? See, Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown went from competing on the charts to almost doing a joint album, to then subliminal shots, and then a serious rift. Thanks to Lil C's. If you don't know who Lil C's is, he was in Biggie's group, Junior Mafia. And Lil C's, on a record called Play Around, stated that people wanted to be like Lil' Kim. If you don't know, Lil' Kim is also Junior Mafia, also under the Biggie umbrella. Kim also then helped by taking shots on another record, the Notorious Kim. Now, Foxy took offense to these shots because she perceived they were being sent at her. And then she responded on a record called Bang Bang, which was a record by Capone and Noriega. Now, just a few months after this, words eventually did turn into violence, right? there was an entourage of Lil Kim and her people who would eventually see Capone and Noriega at the Hot 97 radio station. Outside of that, shots would ring because, you know, they get into an argument because Foxy Brown is dissing Kim on this Capone and Noriega song. And although there were no fatalities, one man, you know, sustained gunshot wounds. And in the days following this, you know, Foxy Brown eventually would issue a statement saying that her and Lil Kim should, you know, resolve their differences. Now, they didn't have a full, you know, reconciliation, but Foxy and Kim would eventually kind of let it die out in a way because Lil Kim had ended up serving 1 year in prison for 3 counts of perjury, which was related to that shooting, by the way. So it's you know, it's something that eventually would die out. I mean, both women eventually, they went back and forth a little bit again, but you could tell this one's over. We're in 2025, right? So another one, right? Similarities, want to do records together, subliminals, competition. And then although it's not Lil Kim and Foxy Brown getting into it directly, it's Kim and her entourage running into Capone and Noriega. Shots are fired. That's a weird one, right? Of how, although it may not be beef directly, you can see how it can still lead to violence. All right, but what about when someone has beef with a rapper, but the other doesn't? It's kind of like the last thing I want to cover here because maybe the other rapper sees things as just competition and battling and he doesn't see it as a big deal, right? I want to close this novel by discussing a rift between Tupac and Biggie, using what we talked about at the beginning, right? I started this doc by telling you that Biggie's songs, What's Beef, right, was a song that really would stand as a theme of this piece, right? I use it to present the theme of this piece, right? And it's unfortunate because Tupac, for his reasons, he believed that Diddy and Biggie, former friends, were, you know, involved or had knowledge of, you know, his shooting beforehand at Quad Studios. Maybe feeling like they set him up, etc. And it's unfortunate because his belief of that is what made him go from we're cool to now we have beef. He saw it as something very serious. I mean, it didn't help that Biggie also had a song titled Who Shot Ya, which was released. But, you know, Biggie claims that had nothing to do with Pac. It was just a song that he wrote. And I'm not here to go down the rabbit hole of this unfortunate situation and a topic that many people have made hundreds of documentary on. But I am here to use it as an example of how the webs of beefs and hip hop can get complicated and deadly, right? How one person can be cool with another person, but when people get involved with street stuff, we're going to the same studio. I see you, you leave the studio, I get shot. I think maybe you're involved. You see how it goes. And now I'm beefing with you. And then some person that's cool with me may have an issue with Diddy. Another guy has an issue with Suge. We're both, it just gets really weird and convoluted. I mean, like I said, Biggie's on record saying Who Shot Ya was not about Pac. Right? He's on record saying he had no knowledge of Pac's shooting. He's on record saying even after Tupac passed that he was trying to bridge the gap between the West Coast and the East Coast, right? A decision that I think cost him his life when he went to Cali. But the idea is that Tupac, on the other hand, he just saw things his way. He was embroiled in not only his issues with Biggie, but was actively warring and was actively engaged in conflict and active conflicts with other MCs and other street figures, right? And as seen in the last footage before his demise, he was being confrontational. But the reality is, although I understand confrontation and competition being part of this genre, battling being part of this genre, beef is real. Beef is different. Beef can start in the streets. It can start in the music. It can start from what we mentioned of competition. It can start from a battle. But what I want understood is that when it's beef, it needs to be treated with the DEFCON threat level that it is. I need Biggie to understand that whether or not you know, and I'm speaking revisionist history here, but whether or not you thought Pac was out of his mind and you really had nothing to do, once that man says, I effed your wife, you should know, okay, this might be beef. I should probably I should probably not play it cool. Right? And even if it's one-sided, I should probably not play it cool. Right? And it needs to be treated that way. And even Pac himself, who although may think, well, Biggie's not going to entertain me, but I'm beefing with him. It's one-sided, but I'm going to express my thoughts. But when you have that energy of beef around you and you're moving around, you have to be aware of that while you're competing or being confrontational with other people, that energy, that beef energy may lead to something else around you. Do you get the idea of what I'm trying to present to you? That when things become beef, it is serious. The stakes are high. At best, it ends a career. At worst, it ends a life. We all need to be cognizant of this. The audience, the fans, the execs, the managers, the artists, the commentators. Yeah, it's all entertainment until it's beef. I gotta hit you guys with another director's cut here. As I'm doing my edit and I'm finishing things up, I get news on Drake's litigation. Now, we had recent news before, which was about a gentleman named Kojo. They wanted to subpoena him. He's mentioned on Family Matters. They couldn't locate him. Judge grants alternative means to subpoena him. That has been delivered. So, you know, some people are talking about that in Family Matters, and I think that's fair. That's a bit relevant. But that's an individual there. Let's move that aside. Then the next thing is Drake's attorneys, who I'm guessing would keep Drake informed and or check with him on this, are asking for documents from UMG. Has the internet talking? The two main things here are, one, they want any UMG communication about Dave Free, Kendrick's partner in business, any relationship he has with Kendrick's children. So they want communication on that, and communication regarding Kendrick's contract, which was provided, but apparently some of the documents were, had stuff that was redacted, and they want, the full contract. And, the internet's talking because of, this escalation in terms of going to the courtroom. And I talked to you guys about it and how we got here and why it's tough for me, because on one hand, fight the $1 billion corporation if you believe you're wrong. But on another hand, it's like, hey, this is just another way of, getting Kendrick involved in a lot of this stuff. You're in his business. So, for me, the big part is, how did we get here and why I'm doing this, Doc? And it's the escalation. We wouldn't be here if your whole argument is you're defamed. We wouldn't be here if, that escalation doesn't go from competition battle to beef. And the idea is, you involve the family. Now the PDF stuff in your family, is involved. The Meet the Grams, not like us. And then lastly, I've talked a lot about, again, I want a resolution on Drake's case because on one hand, I saw the plot twist stuff. If you guys don't know, that's like Drake's Finster and, the 100 gigs where he was posting a lot of videos and, sort of behind the scenes stuff and music. And I thought, oh, wait, maybe, Drake this is his way of fighting a label and trying to go independent. And then he does the Party Next Door album, some sexy songs for you. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is a way of, working with Party, but UMG's only slightly involved. And then from that on to now this Iceman rollout, which will be his new album, where he tells, kind of, I'm guessing, maybe going to be like a tell-all of what he sees is happening here. But my problem is, you're in a litigation with this label, saying they defamed you, you don't trust them, but you're dropping music with that same label. Right, you've got your attorneys asking for documentation. Damn near, almost pseudo CIA type of stuff here, right? Like, oh, the secrets, the dark. And then on another hand, you're trusting them to put out your music and distribute it for you. And then at the same breath, we'll start talking about suppression. So this is kind of some of what I'm talking about on the flip-flop nature of, do you get that this is beef, dog? Do you understand where this has went to? It seems like in your litigation you do, but you were so quick to go to the, family stuff and allegation stuff, very quickly.